Ruth Tanner was still hooked to a ventilator in room 214 when her son signed the papers that sold her husband's farm for $86,000, split it with his sister before she opened her eyes, and told the nurse she won't even remember she had a farm. Her daughter split the check before her mother ever sat up in bed. $86,000, gone in one signature, while Ruth Tanner lay tied to tubes in a room that smelled like rubbing alcohol and burnt coffee. Gary Tanner told a nurse his mother wouldn't even remember the place. Denise Tanner Cole called the farmhouse a wreck nobody wanted and put $40,000 down on a lake cabin before her mother could sit up straight in a wheelchair. $31,000 of Gary's debt vanished in the same week. Nobody drove out to Sugar Camp Lane and opened the pantry door. And 6 weeks later, an old woman in a hospital gown got down on her knees on her own kitchen floor and started prying up a board with her bare hands. But before the floorboard, there was the hayfield, and the 6 years since, and the morning an ambulance came up County Road 9 with its lights going, and nobody in Briar Hollow to see it but a rooster. Nobody thought to open the pantry door first. Room 214 at Ozark Regional smelled like antiseptic over something sourer underneath it. The smell hospitals never quite get out. Ruth Tanner lay small in the bed, her white hair flat against the pillow, a tube taped under her nose. Machines beeped in a rhythm nobody in the room was really listening to. Gary Tanner stood by the window with a folder under his arm. He was 44, going soft at the middle, wearing the kind of blazer that fit an insurance office but not a hospital hallway. His phone buzzed against his hip and he silenced it without looking. "She's stable," the doctor had said that morning. "Stable doesn't mean awake. Could be days, could be longer." Gary had nodded like a man taking notes at a sales meeting. Then he'd gone straight to the nurse's station and asked where a patient's family could get power of attorney paperwork notarized on short notice. Denise arrived an hour later smelling like her car's air freshener, sunglasses pushed up into hair that had cost more than the farm's electric bill for a year. She hugged nobody. She looked at her mother in the bed the way a person looks at a car that needs an estimate. "Well," she said, "we can't just let the place sit there rotting, Gary. Taxes don't stop because Mom's in a coma." "She's not in a coma," Gary said. "She's sedated. Same difference for 6 weeks. Denise dropped into the vinyl chair by the window. "Ted says a buyer's already looking at the county. Cash. Wants an answer by Friday." Ted was Denise's husband, a realtor 2 towns over who sold lake property to people from St. Louis. He had a way of talking about land like it was inventory on a shelf, priced to move. Gary opened the folder on the little rolling table meant for hospital trays. Inside were the power of attorney papers a lawyer's assistant had rushed through 2 days before, back when everyone still used the word temporary. $86,000, he said, for 40 acres and a house that's falling in on itself. That roof alone is going to cost 20 grand to fix. Nobody's paying more than that for a place with a hole in the porch and a barn about to fall down. "It was Dad's whole life," Denise said, not looking up from her phone. "It was Dad's whole life 20 years ago." Gary clicked a pen. "Now it's a liability sitting on a hill collecting raccoons." He signed on the line marked seller, then slid the paper across for Denise's signature beside his own. The pen scratched twice, quiet as anything. Nobody in the hallway heard $86,000 change hands over a hospital tray table meant for orange jello. A nurse named Carla came in to check the monitors and caught the tail end of it. Folder half closed, Gary sliding it back into his bag like a man closing out a lunch tab. "Everything all right?" Carla asked, mostly out of habit. "Just handling some business for Mom," Gary said. "She's not going to be in any shape to deal with paperwork for a while. Might as well take care of it now." Carla glanced at Ruth, tube in her nose, chest rising and falling on its own slow schedule. "She's tougher than she looks," Carla said. "I've seen her kind pull through worse." Gary smiled the smile he used on clients who wanted a lower premium. "She won't even remember she had a farm," he said, and zipped the folder into his bag like it was nothing more than a lunch reservation. Denise didn't look up. "40 down on the Table Rock cabin," she said to her phone, texting Ted. "Tell them yes." That was Tuesday. By Thursday, the farm on Sugar Camp Lane had a new owner on paper, a Springfield man named Roy Delp who bought distressed land cheap and either flipped it or sat on it till the county rezoned. By Friday, Gary's $31,000 of debt to 2 credit cards and a boat loan was paid off in a single transfer. Clean as a whistle. By the following Monday, Denise and Ted had signed for the cabin, $40,000 down, Lakeview, dock included. Ruth Tanner knew none of it. She lay in room 214, while her family settled her affairs like a estate already closed, and the machines kept their slow rhythm, and nobody drove the 11 miles out past the county line to walk through a house that still had her husband's boots by the back door. She came up out of it slow, the way a diver comes up so the bends don't get her. First there was sound, before there was anything else. Beeping. A cartwheel that needed oil. Somebody's radio down the hall playing gospel too low to make out the words. Then there was light, gray at first, then the shape of a window blind. Then there was Carla's face, close and kind, saying her name. Ruth? Ruth Tanner? Can you hear me, honey? Ruth's mouth was dry as chalk. It took 3 tries to get words out of it. The hens, she said. Carla leaned in. What was that? Did somebody let the hens out? It wasn't quite a question the way she said it, too tired to lift at the end. They'll go off laying if nobody lets them out in the morning. I'll find out for you, Carla said, the kind of thing you say to keep a patient calm, not because you have any idea about hens. Ruth's eyes drifted shut again, and for a moment Carla thought she'd gone back under. Then the eyes opened once more, clearer this time, fixing on Carla like a woman coming back into her own life, one small piece at a time. Somebody needs to let them out, Ruth said again. They don't lay right if they're cooped up past sunup. Not the farm, not the money, not her children, not the papers signed over her sleeping body, 2 rooms and a nurse's station away from where she lay. A woman half out of a stroke, tubes still taped to her arm, and the first thing on her mind was 30 laying hens on a hill she hadn't seen in 6 weeks. Ruth Tanner had kept books on that farm for 43 years without ever once needing an accountant, kept the egg count in a composition notebook down to the dozen, and could tell by the sound of a hen's cluck whether she was sick 2 days before the bird knew it herself. She had never told a soul the last thing Walter said to her that mattered, 6 years back, days before his heart went out on him in the hayfield. She hadn't thought about it in a long time. It came to her now, lying in that bed, clear as if he'd said it that morning. If anything goes sideways, look behind the flour before anywhere else. She'd laughed at the time, thought he meant a recipe, some joke about her pie crust. She hadn't thought about the flour bin in 6 years. She thought about it now. Nobody had told her about the sale yet. Nobody had told her about the cabin or the debt paid off or Roy Delp's crew scheduled to start clearing brush off 40 acres inside of a month. She didn't ask about any of that, not that first day, not the second. She asked about the hens 3 more times before a nurse finally admitted gently that nobody had been out to the farm. It was Gary who finally told her, a week later, sitting in a chair pulled up close to the bed, folder nowhere in sight this time. Mom, we need to talk about the farm, he said. While you were under, some decisions had to get made. You weren't in any shape to. Where's Walter's boots? Ruth said. Her voice was stronger now, but slow, each word set down careful, like a woman crossing ice. By the back door. Where's Walter's boots? Mom, listen, the place was falling apart. The roof, the barn, all of it. We got an offer, a good one, and we took it before it fell through. $86,000. That's more than that place was worth, if you want the truth. Ruth looked at her son a long moment. Something in her face did not move at all. The stillness of a woman deciding not to say the first thing that came to her. You sold the farm, she said. We sold the farm, Gary said. Denise and I both signed. We had power of attorney, Mom. It was all legal. You weren't awake to ask. Whose farm was it? Ruth said. Gary's jaw worked once. Yours and Dad's. But Dad's gone 6 years, Mom, and you can't run 40 acres alone at your age, and it wasn't doing you any good sitting there falling down. When do I go home? Ruth said. Nobody answered that one straight for a long moment, and in the silence Ruth understood, the way a person understands weather coming before the sky says so, that there was no home left standing the way she'd left it. She was discharged on a Thursday in March, 5 weeks and 2 days after the ambulance came up County Road 9. Denise drove her because Gary had a client meeting, and the whole ride out from Ozark Regional, Denise talked about the weather and a sale at the grocery in town and nothing at all about $86,000 or a lake cabin with $40,000 down on it. They didn't drive to Sugar Camp Lane. They drove to a rental duplex on the edge of town that Denise had arranged, furnished with things from a discount store, smelling of new carpet glue. "You'll be comfortable here," Denise said, setting Ruth's one bag on a bed that wasn't hers. "Close to town, close to the pharmacy." Ruth stood in the middle of a living room she had never seen before in her life and said nothing at all. She was 78 years old, and she had raised 2 children in a farmhouse on a hill and buried a husband in a churchyard 3 miles from it. And now she was standing on carpet that still had the vacuum lines in it from a cleaning crew, in a house that belonged to nobody's memory but a landlord's ledger. "I want to see the place," she said, "before they tear anything down. Mom, there's really no need. I want to see the place, Denise." It took her 2 more days to get someone to drive her, and in the end, it wasn't Denise or Gary who did it. It was Earl Hutchins, 82 years old, who had worked that farm alongside Walter Tanner for 40 years and heard through the church prayer chain that Ruth was out of the hospital and living in a rental duplex like a stranger in her own county. He showed up at her door in a truck older than either of her children, and he didn't say much, just held the door open and let her climb in on her own, the way Walter always had. The farmhouse on Sugar Camp Lane still stood when they pulled up the gravel drive, though a crew had already been out to mark the barn with a strip of orange tape, and a survey stake sat driven into the yard where Ruth used to hang wash. The porch step still had the same crack in it Walter never got around to fixing. The screen door still hung a half-inch crooked. Ruth climbed those steps slow, one hand on the rail, Earl a pace behind her saying nothing, letting her go first. Inside, the house smelled like dust and disuse, curtains still hanging, dishes still in the cupboard where she'd left them the morning the ambulance came. Nobody had touched much of anything yet. Roy Delp's crew was set to start clearing in 3 weeks. For now, the house sat quiet, waiting, the way a house waits when it doesn't know yet what it's about to lose. Ruth walked straight through the front room, past the sofa Walter used to fall asleep on during the 6 o'clock news, straight back to the kitchen, and stood in front of the pantry door like she'd been walking toward it her whole life without knowing it. She opened it. Empty shelves, a few dusty jars, the old flour bin still sitting in the corner where it had sat for 40 years. She got down on her knees in front of it, slow, joints complaining the whole way, Earl's hand hovering near her elbow in case she needed it. She pulled the bin aside. Under it, where the linoleum had worn thin and pale, one board sat just a hair higher than the ones beside it, its edge worn smooth like it had been lifted more than once by hands that knew exactly where to press. Ruth Tanner set her fingernails into that seam and pulled. The board came up with a groan, old nails giving all at once. Under it sat a shallow hollow cut clean into the joist, and inside that hollow, wrapped in oilcloth, gone stiff with age, something small and square. Ruth's hands shook, pulling it out. Not from the stroke, from something older than that. "Earl," she said. "Earl, come look at this." Earl Hutchins knelt down beside her, slow on his own bad knees, and looked at the bundle in her lap. "That's Walter's oilcloth," he said. "I'd know it anywhere." He kept his good knife wrapped in the same stuff. Ruth unwound the cloth with fingers that wouldn't quite cooperate. Inside was a tin, the kind that used to hold hard candy, rusted at one corner, dented like it had been kicked once and picked back up. She popped the lid. A brass key sat on top of a folded scrap of paper. She lifted the key out first, turned it over in her palm. Small, old-fashioned, the kind that didn't look like it belonged to any door in the house. "That's not a house key," Earl said. "No," Ruth said, "it isn't." She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was Walter's, blocky and careful, the way he wrote when something mattered to him. First State Bank, Box 114. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something she understood better. "Earl," she said, "I don't have a box at the bank." "You don't," Earl said. "But Walter did. Or he made one sometime and never told you." Ruth sat back on her heels, the key cold in her hand, the tin empty now except for its oilcloth. Something in her chest was moving that hadn't moved in 6 weeks, not since before the ambulance, not since before any of it. Why would he hide a key from his own wife, she said, not really asking Earl, asking the house, asking Walter. Earl was quiet a minute. Then he said, "Walter didn't trust banks much. Didn't trust lawyers either, not all the way. But he trusted a locked box more than he trusted people talking around a kitchen table. He told me once, long time back, that a man ought to keep his important paper somewhere nobody could argue him out of it. What paper? Ruth said. I don't know, Ruth. I never asked. Wasn't my business. Earl looked at her steady. But I know Walter Tanner didn't hide a key under a pantry floor for a rainy day fund. That man kept his savings in the same account you did, same as anybody. This is something else. Ruth closed her fist around the key. It bit into her palm, small and hard and real. The first thing in 5 weeks that felt like it belonged to her and nobody else. He told me something, she said slowly, before he died. Out in the hayfield, the week before his heart went. He said if anything ever went sideways, I should look behind the flour before anywhere else. I thought he meant a recipe. I've thought that for 6 years. Don't sound like a recipe to me, Earl said. No, Ruth said. It doesn't sound like a recipe at all. She got herself up off the floor, Earl's hand under her elbow this time, no argument in her about taking it. She stood in the kitchen a long moment, looking around at the cupboards, the counter, the window over the sink where she'd washed 43 years of dishes, watching that hayfield turn from green to gold and back to green. I need to get into town, she said. First date's still on the square, isn't it? Far as I know. Today, Earl, not next week. Today. Earl looked at her, and something in his face said he understood exactly what she meant, even if he didn't know what was in that box any more than she did. I'll drive you, he said. But Ruth, you ought to call Vivian Marsh first. The lawyer? Why? Because if Gary and Denise signed papers on this place while you were laid up, there's going to be lawyer business in it somewhere. And whatever's in that box, if it matters, it's going to matter in a courtroom kind of way before it matters in a kitchen kind of way. Vivian's sharp. She did right by the Hendricks family when their boy tried the same thing with their mother's place over in Christian County. Ruth hadn't heard that story. She filed it away anyway, the way she'd filed away every fact worth keeping for 50 years of keeping a farm's books straight. You have her number? I have her office number. She's in that little building off the square next to the feed store used to be. She'll see you. Vivian doesn't turn away a widow who calls her scared. I'm not scared, Ruth said, and was surprised to hear it come out steady and mean it. Earl almost smiled. No, he said. Reckon you're not. They left the tin's key wrapped back in the oilcloth, the paper folded inside it, and Ruth held the whole bundle in her lap the entire ride into Briar Hollow, past the feed store and the little diner on the square, where she and Walter used to get pie on Sundays after church, past the courthouse with its stone steps worn soft in the middle from 100 years of boots. Vivian Marsh's office sat in a narrow storefront with a hand-painted sign, and Vivian herself came to the door before Earl had even cut the engine, like she'd been watching the street out of habit. She was younger than Ruth expected a lawyer to be, maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair and a way of looking at a person like she was already 3 questions ahead of the conversation. Mrs. Tanner, Vivian said. Earl called me on the drive over. Come on in and sit down. Tell me everything from the start, and don't leave anything out because you think it doesn't matter. Sometimes the thing that doesn't matter is the thing that matters most. Ruth sat in a chair across a desk stacked with folders, the tin still in her lap, and told her about the ambulance and the 6 weeks and the hens and the pantry floor and the key. Vivian listened without writing anything down until Ruth got to the part about the sale, $86,000, Gary's signature and Denise's signature on a paper Ruth never saw. They had power of attorney, Vivian said. It wasn't a question. Do you know if it was durable or limited to medical decisions? I don't know what that means, Ruth said. It means everything, Vivian said. Give me a day. I'm going to pull the deed on your property from the courthouse, and I want to see exactly what your husband filed. And when, and how. You said 1968? I don't know when. I just know he had it. He never really talked business with me, past what needed doing on the farm day to day. Some men were like that, Vivian said, not unkindly. Doesn't mean he didn't take care of things. Sometimes it means the opposite. She looked at the key in Ruth's hand. That box could be anything, Mrs. Tanner. Could be old photographs, could be war medals. I don't want you walking in there expecting a miracle. I'm not expecting anything, Ruth said. I just want to know what my husband thought was worth hiding. Vivian almost smiled at that, the same near smile Earl had given her in the truck. "All right," she said, "let's go find out." The three of them drove the 4 blocks to First State Bank together, Earl's truck idling at the curb, while Vivian walked Ruth inside, past the teller's windows to the back room where a young man in a bank vest checked Ruth's identification twice against a signature card that had sat in a drawer, untouched, since 1968. "Ruth Tanner," he read off the card. "This box hasn't had an access request in 50-some years, ma'am." "That sounds about right," Ruth said. He led her back to the vault, the key from the pantry floor turning easy in its lock like it had been oiled yesterday, and pulled out a long metal box and set it on the little table in the private room, and stepped back to give her privacy the way the bank's manners required. Ruth lifted the lid. Inside sat another tin, older even than the one from the pantry, and underneath it, flat and yellowed, a folded document with a courthouse stamp still visible in the corner, and beside that, heavy in a canvas roll that clinked when she moved it, something that was not paper at all. Ruth lifted the canvas roll first. It was heavier than it looked, and it clinked when she set it on the table, a sound like something out of an old Western picture show. She unrolled it careful, and 40 silver dollars spilled out in 2 neat rows, dated coins, most of them from the 50s, a few older than that. She picked one up. Walter's thumbprint might as well have been pressed right into the metal. She'd watched him flip a coin like that so many times deciding chores. "Lord," said the young man in the vest who had not quite managed to step all the way out of the room. "Those are pre-1965, 90% silver. You don't see a stack like that outside a coin show." "Nobody asked you," Vivian said, not unkind, just quick. And the young man reddened and pulled the door most of the way shut behind him. Ruth set the coin down like it might crack. "Walter never said a word about coins." "Man wasn't showing off," Vivian said. "Man was hiding it. There's a difference." She'd already turned to the folded document, easing it open on the table with 2 fingers, the way she'd handle something that might tear if she breathed wrong. The courthouse stamp sat purple and faded in the corner, dated August of 1968. Vivian read it once through silent, lips barely moving. Then she read it again, slower, and Ruth watched her face change the way a sky changes before rain, not sudden, just a graying at the edges. "Ruth," Vivian said, "I need you to sit down. I'm already sitting. Sit down more." Vivian turned the paper so Ruth could see it, though the words swam some for her, the type small and old and legal. Vivian's finger came down on one paragraph near the bottom. "Your husband didn't just own this farm outright. He filed a deed that granted the property to both of you jointly, with a reserved life estate to you, specifically to you, Ruth Tanner, naming you, in the event he predeceased you. Say that in words I use. It means the land was never fully his, to leave to anybody but you. It means when Walter died 6 years ago, this deed made sure the farm couldn't be sold, not by him if he'd lived, not by your children after, not by anybody, without your signature, yours alone. Doesn't matter whose name got typed onto a power of attorney. Doesn't matter what a nursing home doctor said about your capacity while you were under. This clause sits above all of it." Ruth looked at the paper a long moment. "So the sale is void," Vivian said. "Not voidable. Not something we have to fight to unwind in some slow, ugly way. Void from the moment Gary put his name on it. Your son sold something he never had the legal right to sell in the first place." The room went quiet enough, Ruth could hear the vault's ventilation humming somewhere behind the wall. "He doesn't know," Ruth said. "No," Vivian said. "I'd guess he doesn't. Man who's already spent $40,000 on a lake cabin doesn't usually know he's sitting on a landmine." She folded the deed back along its old creases, gentle, and looked up at Ruth. "You understand what this means for the money end of things. That $86,000 they took. That was never a fair number to begin with. I had a rough word this morning with an appraiser I trust before we even walked in here, because Earl called me twice on the drive over asking if I thought the place was worth what your son said. And 40 acres on Sugar Camp Lane, house included, at current land values around Briar Hollow, with the timber stand on the north side factored in, he put it low end around $410,000, not 86. Vivian let that sit. And that's before we say one word about 40 pre-1965 silver dollars sitting in a box nobody but you and your husband ever knew existed. Coin dealer I've worked with before would put a stack like that, depending on grading, somewhere near 150,000, maybe more if a couple of these are the years I think they are. Ruth didn't say anything for a moment. She turned the coin over in her fingers again, feeling its weight, feeling something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger, something with no good name to it. He never told me, she said finally. 43 years, and he never told me a thing about any of it. Maybe he was going to, Vivian said. Maybe he ran out of time. Man doesn't always get to finish what he starts, Ruth. But he left you a map, flower bin, tin, key, box 114. That's not a man who forgot you. That's a man who trusted you'd find your own way to it. Whenever the day came, you needed it. Ruth thought about the hayfield, the smell of cut grass, Walter's voice low and easy the week before his heart went. If anything ever goes sideways, look behind the flower before anywhere else. She'd spent 6 years believing that was a joke about her own bad memory for recipes. It hadn't been a joke at all. What do we do now? Ruth said. Vivian was already sliding both documents into a folder from her bag. Careful, like she'd brought the folder along expecting exactly this. We move fast and we move quiet, she said. First thing tomorrow morning I file a notice at the courthouse asserting your life estate and voiding the deed transfer. That's public record the second the clerk stamps it. Second thing, I draft a letter to the buyer's title company because they're going to want their $86,000 back the minute they learn they bought land that was never for sale. Third thing, she looked at Ruth steady. Somebody has to tell Gary and Denise, and I'd rather it come from me, in a room with a table between us, than from a courthouse posting they stumble onto by accident. They'll fight it, Ruth said. They might try, Vivian said, but there's no fighting a deed filed in 1968 and never revoked. There's no lawyer in this county who'll take that case and keep a straight face doing it. What they can do, and what I expect they will do, is come at you soft first. Ask you to sign something. A quitclaim maybe, something that says you agree the sale stands. They'll dress it up as keeping the peace in the family. I won't sign anything, Ruth said, and there was no waver in it at all. I believe you, Vivian said, but I want you ready for it anyway. Because Gary's already spent that debt payoff, and Denise has already put money down on a cabin, and desperate people don't always ask nice the second time. They locked the box back into its wall of steel drawers, key returned to Ruth's palm where it belonged, and the three of them, Ruth and Vivian and Earl waiting faithful at the curb, drove back out of the square with the deed and the coins riding in Vivian's bag like something alive. Earl looked in the rear view the whole way, watching Ruth's face more than the road. Well, he said finally, when the quiet got to be too much, was it a recipe? Ruth almost laughed, the first close call at it in 5 weeks. No, Earl, she said, it wasn't a recipe. What was it then, if you don't mind my asking? Ruth looked out the window at the fields going by, green already this far into spring, cattle standing loose-boned in the afternoon sun the way Walter's herd used to stand before they sold the last of them off 2 winters back. It was Walter, she said, still looking after the place, still looking after me. Man never did trust a lock he couldn't check on himself. Vivian, riding up front, turned partway around. Ruth, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Do you want your children arrested over this? Because that's on the table if it goes far enough. Fraud, elder exploitation, depending how the county attorney reads it. Ruth was quiet a long moment, coin still warm from her own palm sitting heavy in the pocket of her cardigan. I want my farm back, she said. I want my hens back on that hill and my kitchen smelling like it used to. What happens to Gary and Denise after that? She shook her head slow. That's between them and whatever they've got left of a conscience. I'm not asking you to go easy on them, Vivian. I'm just telling you that's not what I'm chasing. Fair enough, Vivian said. But you should know, whether you chase it or not, once that filing goes public tomorrow, it's not really in your hands anymore. A void sale on a place that size draws attention on its own. Title company's going to want answers. Buyer's gonna want his money. That machine starts turning whether you push it or not. Ruth nodded, watching Sugar Camp Lane come up on the right as they passed it, the orange survey tape still fluttering faint against the barn in the distance. Then let it turn, she said. Ruth was barely inside the kitchen door, coat still on, when the phone on the wall rang. Earl had carried the sacks of feed in from the truck bed without being asked. He set them down slow, watching her hand freeze on the receiver. Don't answer that, he said. Not yet. Catch your breath first. It might be Vivian. Vivian doesn't call 5 minutes after we dropped you home. That's a guess ring, Ruth. Somebody guessing you're back. She picked it up anyway. It was Denise. Mama, where have you been? I called the house 4 times. I was in town, Ruth said. Handling some things. What things? Gary said. Earl Hutchins picked you up in his truck like you were headed to a funeral. You're supposed to be resting, not running around the square. I'm resting fine, Denise. There was a pause on the line, the kind Ruth had learned to read over 40 years of raising the girl. Denise was deciding how much to say and how much to save. We're coming by tomorrow, Denise said. Both of us. There's some paperwork you need to look at. What kind of paperwork? Just something to keep things clean, for everybody's sake. Gary's talked to a man at the title company, and there's a form that needs your signature so the sale doesn't get held up on some technicality. Ruth looked at Earl across the kitchen, and Earl looked back at her, and neither one of them said a word into the silence that came after Denise's sentence. What time tomorrow? Ruth said. 10. We won't stay long. Ruth hung the phone back on its cradle, careful, the cord swinging a little against the wall. They know already, she said. Doubt it, Earl said. More like somebody at that title company got nervous and made a call, and now Gary's scared enough to want something in writing before he knows exactly what he's scared of. A quitclaim, Ruth said. Vivian said they'd try that. Then you call Vivian tonight, Earl said. Don't wait on it. Vivian answered on the second ring, and when Ruth told her about the 10 o'clock visit, she went quiet for a second the way she had at the bank, thinking before she spoke. That's fast, Vivian said. Faster than I expected. Means somebody's already spooked. Good. Spooked people make mistakes. She paused. I'll be there at 9:40. I want to be sitting at your table before they walk in that door, Ruth. Not after. You think they'll listen to you? I think they'll have to. Vivian's car came up the gravel drive at 9:38 the next morning, and she came in through the kitchen door like she already knew the house, folder tucked under one arm, a second folder in her other hand that Ruth hadn't seen the day before. What's that one? Ruth asked. Insurance, Vivian said and almost smiled, and Ruth understood the word different now than she ever had before. Gary's truck came up the drive at 3 minutes past 10, Denise's car right behind it, and Ruth watched them both from the front window, the way she used to watch weather roll in over the ridge, deciding how bad it was going to get before it arrived. Gary came in first, a manila envelope in his hand, and stopped hard in the kitchen doorway when he saw Vivian sitting at the table. What's she doing here? I asked her, Ruth said. Mama, this doesn't need a lawyer. It's 5 minutes of paperwork. Sit down, Gary, Vivian said, not unkind, just certain, the way she'd probably said it to 100 men across that same kind of table. Both of you. Let's talk it through. Denise sat first, purse in her lap like she meant to leave any second. Gary stayed standing a moment longer before he lowered himself into Walter's old chair at the head of the table, the one nobody but Walter used to sit in. Let's just get this done, Gary said. The title company wants a quitclaim deed. It's routine. Confirms you're not disputing the sale. Takes 10 minutes and then we're all done with this. Why would they need that, Ruth said, if the sale already went through clean? Gary's jaw worked a second. Sometimes banks get cautious. That's all it is. Was it a bank that called you? Vivian said. Or was it their title insurer, asking questions about a life estate clause filed in 1968? The kitchen went so quiet, Ruth heard the refrigerator hum kick on behind her. I don't know what that means, Denise said too fast. I imagine you don't, Vivian said. But your buyer's attorney does. He pulled the same deed I pulled yesterday afternoon. Walter Tanner recorded a life estate reserving this property to Ruth, specifically to Ruth, back in August of 1968. That means the two of you never had the legal right to sell it, not with power of attorney, not with any signature but hers. Gary's face didn't move for a second, like the words hadn't landed yet, and then it did, all at once, the color going out of it. That's not, he started. That can't be right. The realtor ran a title search. A title search finds liens, Vivian said. It doesn't always catch a life estate filed 50-some years ago under a deed book nobody's pulled since. It's rare. It's legal. And it's binding. So what? Denise said, voice climbing. You're saying the $86,000 just what? Disappears? I'm saying the sale is void, Vivian said, which means the buyer gets his $86,000 back, and the farm stays exactly where it's always belonged, to your mother. Gary stood up so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor. We already spent that money, he said. I paid off $31,000 of debt with my half. Denise put $40,000 down on a cabin. You're talking about money that isn't sitting in an account anymore. That's a problem for the two of you, Vivian said. Not for Ruth. She's our mother, Denise said, turning on Ruth now, eyes wet and furious both at once. Mama, tell her we didn't mean any harm by it. The doctor said you might not even come out of that hospital walking right. We thought we were doing the responsible thing. You thought I was going to die, Ruth said, quiet, or not remember enough to ask. Nobody answered that. I asked about my hens before I asked about anything else, Ruth said. Nurse told me nobody called to check on them. You didn't think about the farm at all, Denise. You thought about the cabin. Gary's hands were flat on the table now, leaning into them. Fine. Say the deed's real. Say it holds up. What happens to us? That, Vivian said, depends on what your mother wants to do about it. Right now, all I've filed is a notice asserting her life estate. That's public record as of 8 this morning. I haven't filed anything against either of you personally. Not yet. Meaning what? Gary said. Meaning there's a difference between a sale that's void and a case for elder financial exploitation, Vivian said. One of those just needs paperwork. The other needs a prosecutor. Whether we're talking about the second kind is entirely up to Ruth. Denise's eyes went to her mother, quick and pleading, and for a second Ruth saw the girl she used to be, small and barefoot in the hayfield, not the woman sitting across a table asking to keep stolen money. Mama, please. If you go after us for that, Gary could lose his license. I could lose everything with the cabin, the down payment, all of it. You already lost the down payment, Ruth said. The minute this sale goes void, that cabin deal falls in on itself. That's not me doing that to you, Denise. That's a paper your father filed 58 years ago, doing it. Gary sat back down, slow, like his legs had gone out from under the anger. There's got to be a way to fix this without it getting ugly. Vivian, isn't there some kind of settlement, some middle ground? There might be, Vivian said, but it starts with the two of you signing over what's left of that $86,000 toward making the buyer whole, and it starts with you asking your mother, not telling her, what she wants to happen next. The room sat with that a moment, and Ruth looked at her son, 44 years old, insurance broker, a man who'd once split his knee open falling off this same porch and cried into her apron until it stopped hurting, and she felt the anger in her chest sit right alongside something softer that refused to leave no matter what he'd done. I'm not signing your quitclaim, Ruth said, and I'm not deciding today what happens to either of you, but I'll tell you both this once, plain, so there's no confusion walking out of this kitchen. She folded her hands on the table, steady. Your father built something on this land for 43 years, and he built it to outlast every one of us, including me. You didn't beat him. You just didn't know he was still standing guard. Denise's chin trembled, but she didn't cry, not yet. Gary looked at the envelope still in his hand, the quitclaim form nobody was going to sign, and set it down on the table like it had gotten heavier in the last 10 minutes. What happens now? He said. Vivian was already closing her folder. Now the title company gets its notice. Now the buyer gets his money back, and construction on this place stops before that crew shows up with equipment tomorrow morning. And now the two of you go home, and you wait, same as everybody else. Gary's truck pulled out first, gravel spitting under the tires harder than it needed to. Denise sat in her car a minute longer, staring at the house, before she followed him down the lane. Vivian watched them go from the kitchen window. That went about how I figured, she said. Angry, scared, and not done yet. Not done how? Earl said. Gary's the type who calls a lawyer before he calls his own conscience, Vivian said. Watch for a letter. She wasn't wrong. The letter came certified, 4 days later, addressed to Ruth by her full legal name. Earl signed for it because Ruth's hands were still deep in a bowl of biscuit dough when the mail carrier's car came up the drive. Vivian's going to want to see this today, Earl said, turning the envelope over. Return address is a law office out of Springfield. Fancy one, by the look of the letterhead. Ruth wiped flour off her hands and read it standing at the counter. She read it twice. They're saying I'm not competent, she said. Gary's filed something called a petition. Emergency guardianship. Guardianship over what? Over me. She set the paper down like it had gone cold in her hand. Says the stroke left me unable to manage my own affairs. Says somebody responsible needs to be appointed to handle my finances and my property. Effective, immediate. Earl's jaw went tight. Responsible meaning Gary, meaning Gary. Vivian was at the house inside the hour, reading glasses pushed up on her head, papers spread flat on the kitchen table where the quitclaim had sat 4 days before. "This isn't Gary's idea," she said, tapping the filing. "Look at the attorney's name, Beaumont and Hicks. That's Roy Cole's firm's referral partner. Denise's husband didn't just sit home wringing his hands while you two were feuding." "Roy set this up," Ruth said. "Roy sells real estate for a living, Ruth. His commission on your farm sale was $6,000 and it's sitting right alongside the rest of that money in a deal that's about to come apart. He's got as much reason to fight this as Gary does." Vivian flipped a page. "If they get a court to name Gary as your guardian, they don't need you to sign a quitclaim anymore. A guardian can sign for you. This whole filing is built to get around the fact that you said no." "Can they do that?" Earl said. "Just decide a woman's not fit because her son says so?" "Not easily," Vivian said. "But they don't need easy. They need a judge to grant a hearing, and they got one, set for the 16th, over in the county courthouse." She looked up at Ruth. "Same building where I filed the life estate notice. Same clerk's office. Small world when the world's this small." Ruth sat down slow across from her. "What do I need to do?" "You need a doctor's letter, current, saying you're competent to manage your own affairs. I can get that started this week. You need to show up to that hearing looking exactly like what you are, which is a woman running her own kitchen, her own bank account, and her own farm, thank you very much. And you need to not let this rattle you, because rattled is exactly what they're hoping for." "They think I'll fold," Ruth said. "They're counting on it," Vivian said. 10 days from now, in front of a judge, Gary's attorney is going to stand up and say his mother suffered a serious stroke, spent weeks in intensive care, and isn't capable of protecting her own interests. And unless we're ready, that story sounds reasonable to a stranger in a robe who's never met you. Earl leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Reckon Walter'd have something to say about a judge deciding whether Ruth Tanner can run her own house." "Reckon he would," Ruth said, and there was iron in it now. Not the raw hurt from the bank. "I fed 40 head of cattle by myself the winter he broke his collarbone. I balanced these books every month for 43 years while he ran the fields. Somebody wants to stand up in a courthouse and say, 'I can't think straight,' they're welcome to try it in front of me." Vivian almost smiled. "That's the tone I need in that room." The following week brought a second letter. This one addressed to Vivian's office instead, forwarded to the house in a manila envelope of its own. It was from the title company handling the farm sale, and it wasn't asking any more. "Dale Pruitt wants his $86,000 back," Vivian said, reading it out at the kitchen table with Earl and Ruth, both leaning in. "That's the buyer. Retired fellow from over toward Rolla, bought the place to run a few horses on it. His attorney's demanding full repayment within 30 days of the void filing, plus his survey costs, another $2,200. "He's not part of this mess," Ruth said. "He didn't do anything wrong." "No, he didn't," Vivian said, "which is exactly why the law's on his side too. He paid good money for land that was never for sale. Somebody has to make him whole, and it isn't going to be you. It's going to be Gary and Denise," Earl said. "It's going to have to be," Vivian said. "Gary already spent $31,000 on his debts. Denise put 40 down on a cabin that's likely gone now anyway, since the seller's not going to hold a lake property for a buyer whose money turned out to be somebody else's farm. That leaves them a hole of $86,000 and no farm sale standing behind it to cover it. And now there's a court date on top of that," Earl said, "plus a Springfield lawyer's bill. Beaumont and Hicks doesn't work cheap," Vivian said. "I'd guess Gary's looking at another $11,000 just for this petition, win or lose. He's digging the hole deeper, trying to climb out of it." Ruth looked down at her own hands on the table, work-worn, steady, despite everything the last 6 weeks had put through them. "None of this had to happen," she said. "Not one piece of it. They could have just waited. Just asked me, when I woke up, what I wanted done with the place. People in a hurry don't wait," Vivian said. "That's usually how you catch them." Earl drove Ruth into town 2 days before the hearing. Same truck, Same road past Sugar Camp Lane, though the orange survey tape was gone from the barn now, taken down the week the sale went void. Dale Pruitt's crew never broke ground. The house stood the way it always had, windows catching the morning sun, chimney cold and waiting. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Earl said, slowing as they passed. "Same barn standing there like it never almost wasn't yours." "Feels like something," Ruth said. "Don't know the word for it yet." They found Vivian at her office with a folder 3 inches thick, doctor's letter clipped to the front, bank statements behind it, 40 years of tax records Ruth hadn't touched since Walter died, all of it laid out like evidence at a trial, because that's exactly what it was about to become. "Judge Ellery's hearing it," Vivian said. "I've been in front of her a dozen times. She doesn't like being told what to think, and she doesn't like a family using the courthouse to settle what ought to be settled at a supper table. That works for us and against us both." "How's it work against us?" Ruth said. "Because she'll want to hear you say it yourself," Vivian said. "Not me talking for you. Not a doctor's letter reading it into the record. She's going to look right at you and ask if you understand what's being asked of you and how you'd like to answer it. That's not a moment I can stand in for you, Ruth. That one's yours." Ruth sat with that a long moment, hands folded on top of the folder like she was steadying it or steadying herself against it. "Good," she said finally. "I've got plenty to say." Vivian slid the doctor's letter across the table, fresh that morning, signature still damp at the bottom in her mind, if not on paper. "Dr. Okafor examined you Tuesday," she said. "Full cognitive workup. He's ready to swear to it in front of Judge Ellery. No hedging." "What's it say?" Ruth asked. "That you're sharp-oriented and capable of managing your own affairs." Vivian tapped the page. His words, not mine. Earl leaned against the counter, coffee going cold in his hand. "Should have never needed a doctor to say what everybody around here already knows." "Doesn't matter what everybody knows," Vivian said. "Matters what's on paper Thursday morning." The phone rang before Ruth could answer. Earl picked it up since her hands were still full of the folder. He listened a second and his face changed. "Slow down," he said. "Say that again." Ruth watched him go still by the counter, knuckles white around the receiver. "That's First State," he said, covering the mouthpiece. "Somebody tried to move money out of your savings account this morning." Ruth's stomach dropped. "Move it where?" Earl asked, then repeated it back. "A cashier's check, $9,000. Made out to a law firm in Springfield. Beaumont and Hicks," Vivian said, already reaching for her own phone. "That's the one," Earl said. "Who authorized it?" Ruth said. "I didn't sign anything." Earl relayed the question, listened, and his jaw tightened further. "Gary did. Old power of attorney, the one from the hospital stay. Bank flagged it because it's never been formally revoked. Teller got suspicious, called the branch manager before she processed it." "Revoked," Ruth said. "I thought that expired when I left the hospital." "POAs don't expire on their own," Vivian said. "They expire when somebody files paperwork to kill them. I should have done that the first week. My mistake, not yours." "So he still had access," Ruth said. "Had," Vivian said. "Past tense. Tell them to hold that check, Earl. Tell them I'm coming down there within the hour to file the revocation in person." Earl passed the message along, then hung up. "Manager's name is Donna Kessler. She's holding it. Said she'd known your account since Walter opened it back in '71, and she wasn't about to let a Springfield lawyer walk off with $9,000 on a signature line nobody double-checked." "Bless her," Ruth said, quiet. Vivian was already gathering her folder, her coat, her keys. "This is good, actually." "Good," Ruth said. "He tried to steal from me 2 days before a hearing about whether I can manage my own money, and that's good?" "It's good because now we've got proof," Vivian said. "Not accusation. Proof. Dated, time-stamped, with a bank employee ready to testify to it. Gary just handed Judge Ellery the exact reason she needs to worry about him, not you." They drove into town together, Earl's truck rattling over the same stretch of County Road 9 Ruth had traveled a dozen times since the stroke, past the turn for Sugar Camp Lane, past the church, into the square where First State Bank sat, with its brick face and its brass letters, same as it had since before Ruth was born. Donna Kessler met them at the door herself, a stout woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain. "Mrs. Tanner," she said, taking Ruth's hand in both of hers. "I am so sorry this happened." I should have flagged that authorization the day you were discharged. Not your fault, Donna, Ruth said. None of this is anybody's fault but Gary's. He called this morning, Donna said, lowering her voice like the walls might carry it. Said it was urgent, said you'd approved it over the phone, that you just weren't well enough to come in yourself. I never called this bank, Ruth said, not once. I know that now, Donna said. The voice on the phone claiming to be you wasn't even trying that hard. I've cashed your checks for 30 years, Mrs. Tanner. I know your voice. Vivian had papers out on the counter already, pen moving fast. I need the revocation notarized and filed today, and I want a written statement from you, Donna, about this morning's call, exactly what was said and when. Happy to give it, Donna said. In writing, under oath, whatever the judge needs. Ruth signed where Vivian pointed, hand steady, the same hand that had once written checks for cattle feed and fence wire and 100 other things a farm eats money for. When she finished, she looked up at Donna. $9,000, Ruth said. That's on top of everything else he's already spent. Man's drowning, Earl said, and he's still trying to pull more people under with him. Vivian folded the statement into her folder, already 3 inches thick and getting thicker. This goes straight to Judge Ellery Thursday morning. Attempted unauthorized withdrawal 48 hours before a competency hearing. That's not a family squabble anymore. That's a pattern. Outside, the square looked the way it always did on a Tuesday. A few trucks parked nose in along the curb, the diner's open sign glowing red in the window. Somebody's dog asleep on the courthouse steps 2 blocks down like it owned the place. Ruth stood on the sidewalk a moment, letting the sun sit on her shoulders. Feels like they just keep coming, she said. One thing, then another. That's what people do when they're scared, Vivian said. They stop thinking ahead. They just grab at whatever's closest. $9,000 was closest, Ruth said. $9,000 was reckless, Vivian said, and reckless is exactly what wins us Thursday. Earl drove her home past the courthouse, slow, so she could look at it. Squat limestone building, flag out front, hanging still in the windless afternoon, the kind of building that had never once cared whose name was on the paperwork in front of it, only whether the paperwork was true. Judge sits in there, Ruth said. She does. Never been in front of one in my life. Paid my taxes, never had a speeding ticket, never owed anybody a dime I didn't pay back. That's exactly why you'll walk out of there just fine, Earl said. You've got nothing to hide, Ruth. Some folks walk into a courtroom with a lifetime of things they don't want said out loud. You've got the opposite problem. You've got a lifetime of things everybody already knows are true. She thought about that most of the ride home, past the mailbox, up the gravel drive, the farmhouse waiting at the top of the rise the way it always waited. Patient, unbothered, like it had already decided how Thursday was going to go, and just hadn't told her yet. That night she sat at the kitchen table with the bank statement in front of her, the one line where $9,000 almost left her account under her son's signature, and beside it Walter's old ledger book, the one she'd pulled out of the hutch weeks back and hadn't put away since. She turned to a blank page near the end and picked up a pencil. At the top she wrote Thursday's date. Beneath it, in her own steady hand, she wrote what she meant to say to a judge she'd never met, one line at a time, the way Walter used to plan a planting before he ever touched the plow. Denise showed up at 8:15 that night, headlights sweeping the kitchen window before Ruth even heard the car in the drive. Earl was still there, coffee cup empty in front of him, and he stood up slow when the knock came. "That's not a friendly visit," he said. "Nobody friendly knocks like that." Ruth opened the door anyway. Denise stood on the porch in a coat too thin for the evening, arms crossed tight against herself. "Mama, I need to talk to you," Denise said. "Alone, if Earl doesn't mind." "Earl stays," Ruth said. "Whatever you've got to say, he can hear it." Denise's mouth tightened, but she stepped inside. She didn't sit. She stood by the counter, the same counter where the quitclaim had sat weeks before, and she looked older than 41 right then, older than Ruth had ever seen her look. "The cabin's gone," Denise said. "Seller pulled out today. Said he wasn't waiting around on a buyer whose financing fell through twice." "I'm sorry to hear that," Ruth said, and meant it, though not the way Denise wanted. "He's keeping $12,000 of our deposit," Denise said. "Non-refundable earnest money. Roy fought it, but the contract's the contract." Her voice cracked on the last word. "That's $12,000 gone. Just gone." On top of everything else. On top of the 86, Earl said quietly, you two never had a right to spend. Nobody asked you, Earl? Denise turned back to Ruth. Mama, please, call off Thursday. Tell the judge you don't want a guardianship. Tell her the family's working it out private. Gary will drop the petition tonight if you'll just sign something saying you don't object to a payment plan on the farm money. A payment plan, Ruth said. We'll pay it back, every dollar. Just not all at once, because we don't have it all at once. Denise's eyes were wet now. Please don't do this to us in front of a courtroom. People will hear about it. Everybody in Briar Hollow will know. Ruth pulled a chair out from the table and sat, hands folded, the way she'd have sat across from a buyer haggling over hay prices 40 years back. Denise, she said, you tried to take $9,000 more out of my account 4 days ago, with a lawyer standing by to cash the check. That was Gary. That wasn't me. You knew about it, Ruth said. Don't tell me you didn't. Denise didn't answer that. She looked at the floor instead, at the boards Walter had laid down himself 30 years back, worn smooth in front of the sink. I'm not signing anything tonight, Ruth said. Not a payment plan, not a quitclaim, not a birthday card, Denise, until Thursday's done and a judge has looked me in the eye and heard me answer for myself. You'd rather humiliate your own daughter in public than help her. You humiliated yourself, Ruth said, the day you signed papers on a woman still hooked to a machine and told a nurse she wouldn't remember she had a farm. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I remember every bit of it, Denise. I remember it better than you'd like. Denise stood there a long moment, coat still buttoned, car still running outside with its lights cutting through the window glass. Then she turned for the door. You're going to regret standing there so proud, she said, hand on the knob. Gary's attorney says this could get ugly for you too. Says a judge might wonder why a woman who just had a stroke is fighting this hard to keep control of money she can't even manage. Let her wonder, Ruth said. I'll answer whatever she asks. The door shut. The headlights swept back across the ceiling and pulled away down the gravel, taillights shrinking to nothing past the mailbox. Earl let out a breath he'd been holding since the knock. $12,000, he said, gone on a cabin that never even had their name on the deed. Poor decisions cost money, Ruth said. Same as good ones, just cost different. You held up fine in there. I've had 6 weeks of practice. Ruth looked at the ledger still open on the table, her notes for Thursday half finished in pencil. She's scared, Earl. I could hear it under all that anger. Scared of what it looks like when the whole county finds out what they did. Ought to have thought of that before they did it. Ought to have, Ruth agreed. Doesn't change that she's still my daughter. Doesn't mean I owe her a signature either. She went back to her notes after Earl left, pencil scratching slow across the page, one line at a time. She wrote about the hens and the ledger books and 43 years of balancing a farm's accounts down to the penny. She wrote about Walter, about the tin behind the flour bin, about a life estate clause that had sat quietel in a courthouse file since 1968, waiting for somebody to need it. She did not write anything about being afraid, though she was, some of what a judge in a black robe might decide about a woman she'd never met. Vivian called at 9 the next morning, voice brisk over the line. Court called. Judge Ellery's moved you up on the docket. 9:30 tomorrow instead of 1 o'clock. Apparently Beaumont and Hicks asked for the earlier slot. Might mean they're worried about something. Might mean they want it over quick, Ruth said. Either way, we'll be ready. Vivian paused. How'd it go with Denise last night? Earl called and told me. About how you'd expect, Ruth said. She's scared and she's angry and she thinks scared and angry ought to buy her something. They usually think that, Vivian said, right up until the day they learn it doesn't. Ruth spent the rest of that day the way she'd have spent a day before planting, walking the house room by room, touching things that didn't need touching, gathering herself the way Walter used to gather himself before a hard piece of ground. She stood in the pantry a long while, hand resting on the flour bin, on the spot where the floorboard had lifted and given up its secret weeks before. The tin sat on a shelf now, empty of its key and its note, both spent doing what Walter had meant them to do all along. You knew this day was coming, she said out loud, to nobody, to the empty kitchen, to a man 6 years gone. You always did plan 2 steps past where anybody else was looking. She slept poorly that night, Not from fear exactly, more from the particular restlessness of a woman with something important to say and only one chance to say it right. Earl picked her up at 8 the next morning, truck idling in the drive, frost still silvering the grass though it was near the middle of the month. "Ready?" he asked when she climbed in. "As I'll ever be," Ruth said. They drove past the mailbox, past Sugar Camp Lane, past the church with its gravel lot half full for a Wednesday, into the square where the courthouse sat waiting, limestone pale in the early sun, flag hanging still against a windless sky. Vivian was already on the steps, folder tucked under one arm, watching for them. "Judge Ellery's punctual," she said when Ruth reached her. "Doors open in 10 minutes. You remember what we talked about?" "Answer what she asks," Ruth said. "Nothing more, nothing less. That's exactly right." Vivian held the courthouse door open. "Let's go show her who's actually been running that farm." Judge Ellery's courtroom sat on the second floor, tall windows letting morning light fall across rows of wooden benches. A dozen folding chairs lined the back wall for spillover. Word travels fast in Briar Hollow. Half the chairs were already full. Gary sat at one table with a lawyer Ruth didn't recognize, silver-haired, city suit, a briefcase with brass corners. Denise sat beside her brother, hands folded so tight her knuckles had gone pale. Neither one looked at Ruth when she came through the door. "That's Beaumont," Vivian said, low, guiding Ruth toward the other table. "Senior partner. Sends his own people out for a $9,000 wire and shows up himself for this. Tells you how worried they are?" "Worried about what?" Ruth said. "Losing," Vivian said. Judge Ellery entered a few minutes later, black robe, reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, a stack of folders under one arm thick enough to double as a doorstop. She sat, adjusted her glasses, looked out over the room like she'd already read every page twice. "Petition for guardianship, filed by Gary Tanner on behalf of his mother, Ruth Tanner," she said. "Let's begin." Beaumont rose first. He talked about the stroke. He talked about hospital records, about confusion in the first days, about a woman who'd needed help just to sign her own name. He held up a single sheet of paper, like it settled the matter. "Your Honor, competency can fluctuate. We're asking the court to appoint a guardian out of caution, not cruelty. A safety net, nothing more." "A safety net," Ruth said under her breath, "that just tried to take $9,000 out from under me." Vivian touched her arm. "Not yet." When it was her turn, Vivian didn't waste time on speeches. She laid 3 things on the table in front of the judge, one at a time. "First, Your Honor, a letter from Mrs. Tanner's treating physician, dated Monday. He examined her personally. His conclusion, in his own words, she is, quote, sharp, oriented, and fully capable of managing her own affairs." Judge Ellery read it, set it down. Second, a sworn statement from Donna Kessler, branch manager at First State Bank. 4 days ago, Gary Tanner attempted to withdraw $9,000 from his mother's savings account using an outdated power of attorney, claiming falsely that Mrs. Tanner had authorized it by phone. The bank caught it. Mrs. Tanner never made that call. A murmur ran through the back row. Gary stared straight ahead. "Third," Vivian said, "I'd like to call Mrs. Tanner herself." Ruth stood. Her knees didn't shake, though she'd half expected them to. She walked to the small wooden box beside the judge's bench and sat. "Mrs. Tanner," Judge Ellery said, gentler than she'd sounded all morning, "how are you feeling these days?" "Tired some evenings," Ruth said. "Same as any woman my age. Nothing wrong with my head, if that's the question." A ripple of quiet laughter. Judge Ellery almost smiled. "Tell me about your finances. Do you know what's in your checking account?" $2,118 last I checked. Tuesday, Ruth said. "Savings has 41,000 more, minus whatever Gary tried to take out of it without asking." Beaumont stood. "Your Honor, that figure is disputed. Sit down, counselor," Judge Ellery said, not unkindly. "Let her finish." "I balance my own books for 43 years, Ruth said. "Feed bills, vet bills, taxes on land my husband and I built with our own hands. I know where every dollar of mine sits. Better than my own son does, apparently, since he's the one $31,000 in debt." Gary's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "Mrs. Tanner," Judge Ellery said, "your son's petition suggests you may not fully understand the sale of your farm while you were hospitalized. Do you understand what happened there?" "I understand it fine," Ruth said. Better than they do, I expect. Meaning? Ruth folded her hands in her lap. Meaning my husband left a paper behind that says that farm was never theirs to sell. Not without my say-so. And my say-so was never given. The room went quiet enough to hear the ceiling fan turning overhead. Beaumont half rose again. Your Honor, that's an unrelated civil matter, not germane to— It's entirely germane, Counselor, Judge Ellery said. If the court's meant to believe this woman can't manage her own affairs, and she's sitting here telling me she's already found a document your clients apparently never looked for. She turned back to Ruth. Is that document filed, Mrs. Tanner? Filed with the county in 1968, Ruth said. My lawyer has the copy. Judge Ellery looked at Vivian. Vivian nodded once. Then I'd say Mrs. Tanner understands her situation considerably better than the people who brought this petition. Judge Ellery took her glasses off, folded them, set them on the folder in front of her. I've heard enough. This court finds no credible evidence that Ruth Tanner lacks capacity to manage her own financial or personal affairs. Petition for guardianship is denied. She looked at Gary directly then, for the first time all morning. Mr. Tanner, I'd also note for the record that an attempted unauthorized withdrawal using a stale power of attorney is the kind of conduct this court takes seriously. I'd think carefully before filing anything else against your mother, without a great deal more than what you brought me today. Gary's lawyer was already gathering papers, jaw set, not meeting anyone's eyes. Denise had gone pale, staring at her own hands like they belonged to somebody else. Outside on the courthouse steps, the morning had warmed enough that Ruth didn't need her coat buttoned. Earl was waiting at the bottom, hat in his hands. Well, he said. Denied, Vivian said, clean and fast. Judge didn't even need a recess to decide it. Earl let out a breath like he'd been holding it since 8:30. Knew it the second Donna Kessler picked up that phone. There's more coming, though, Vivian said, and something in her voice made Ruth look at her sharp. Got a call in my cell right before we walked in. Byers' crew is scheduled to start clearing the old hay barn Friday morning. Grading equipment's already been rented. Friday, Ruth said. That's 2 days. They don't know about the deed yet, Vivian said. Not officially. I've only got it filed, not served. Once that crew starts tearing into that barn, and we've got a closing correction meeting still to schedule with the buyer sitting at the table, things get a lot messier. Messier how? Earl said. Damage to a life estate isn't the same as damage to nothing, Vivian said. If they touch that barn before we've got everyone in a room together, Ruth's got a bigger fight than just a deed. She'd have to prove damages on top of ownership. Ruth looked past them both, down the square, past the diner, toward the road that led home to Sugar Camp Lane, to a barn Walter had built with his own hands the same summer they married. Then we get everyone in a room, Ruth said, before Friday. Vivian was already pulling her phone back out. I'll call the title company myself, and Beaumont. If they want to fight, they can have one in front of the buyer instead of a judge next time. Good, Ruth said. Let them see everything at once. Vivian's calls took less than an hour to line up. By early afternoon, she had a room booked at Ozark Title and Escrow, 2 doors down from the bank, and every name that mattered agreed to sit at the same table Friday morning, 8 o'clock sharp, before any crew touched that barn. Everybody's coming, she told Ruth, hanging up her phone in the truck. Buyer, buyer's wife, Beaumont, Gary, Denise, title officers pulling a rush search tonight. Rush search, Earl said. That mean what I think it means? Means somebody's finally going to look at the whole chain of title, Vivian said, not just the last deed filed. 40-some years of paper, all at once. Ruth looked out the truck window at the square passing by, the diner, the hardware store, the bank sign blinking the time and temperature. Walter's deed's been sitting in that stack the whole time, she said, just waiting on somebody to actually read it. That's exactly what worries Beaumont, Vivian said. A rush search finds things a lazy one skips right over. Friday came in gray and still. No frost this time, just a low sky pressing down over the hills. Ruth wore her good coat, the navy one she kept for church and funerals. Earl drove her into town early, parked outside the title office a full 20 minutes ahead, engine ticking as it cooled. You nervous? He asked. Some, Ruth said. Mostly I want it done. Inside, the office smelled like fresh coffee and old carpet. A long table filled most of the room, chairs already half full. Denise sat near the end, arms crossed, refusing to look up. Gary sat beside her, jaw tight, a legal pad in front of him with nothing written on it yet. Beaumont had his briefcase open, papers fanned out like a man dealing cards he didn't like. A couple Ruth didn't know sat across from them. The man was maybe 50, silver at the temples, a windbreaker instead of a suit coat, like he'd expected a handshake and a set of keys, not a room full of lawyers. His wife sat close beside him, a folder of her own in her lap. "That's Neil and Carol Draper," Vivian said quietly, guiding Ruth to a seat. "They're the ones who signed for the farm. Put $410,000 into an account 2 weeks ago, minus the deposit Gary's already spent." "410," Ruth repeated, "for land they told me was worthless." "Land's worth what it's worth," Vivian said. "Depends who's asking and why." The title officer came in last, a thin woman with reading glasses and a folder thick as a phone book. She introduced herself as Marcy Yoder, sat at the head of the table, and didn't waste any time. "I want to walk through what we found," Marcy said, "before anybody signs anything else today." Neil Draper leaned forward. "Found. That's not a word I like hearing from a title company 2 days before my crew shows up with a bulldozer." "No," Marcy said. "I imagine it isn't." She opened the folder. Standard search only goes back 60 years unless somebody asks for more. Given the age of the file, and given some questions raised this week, we went the full distance. All the way to 1968. Beaumont's pen stopped moving. "There's a warranty deed on record from that year," Marcy said, "executed by Walter and Ruth Tanner, husband and wife, transferring the farm into joint tenancy, with a reserved life estate in favor of Ruth Tanner specifically. That clause was never released, never revoked, never touched again by anybody until the deed filed this past month by Gary Tanner and Denise Tanner Cole." The room went quiet enough to hear the coffee maker gurgling in the corner. "Meaning what?" Neil Draper said, in plain English. "Meaning the sale you closed on," Marcy said, "was never fully valid. A life estate holder has to sign off on any conveyance of the underlying property. Ruth Tanner never signed. Not the listing, not the closing, not one page." Neil Draper turned to Beaumont. "You told me this title was clean." "You said clean, Beaumont. Those words. I've got the email. We relied on the deed presented by the sellers," Beaumont said. "Same as any closing." "You relied on Gary's word," Neil said, voice climbing now. "Gary's word that his mother signed off on selling her own farm while she was flat on her back in a hospital bed. Gary's face had gone the color of old paper. She wasn't going to need it," he said, quiet, almost to himself. "The doctor said, they said, doesn't matter what you thought she'd need," Neil said. "You sold me land that wasn't fully yours to sell." "That's not a family disagreement, Gary. That's my $410,000 sitting on a title with a hole punched straight through it." Carol Draper spoke for the first time, voice tight. "We sold our house in Springfield for this. We're staying in a rental in Cassville right now. My husband gave notice at his job in Joplin because we were moving out here." Ruth watched the color drain further out of Denise's face. Denise hadn't said a word since she'd sat down. Vivian slid a folder across the table, unhurried. "This is a certified copy of the 1968 deed, filed at the county recorder's office this week, along with an affidavit from Mrs. Tanner confirming she never authorized any sale of the property. It's a matter of public record as of Tuesday." Beaumont reached for it, scanned it fast, the way a man reads bad news he already half expected. He set it down without a word. "So, where's that leave us?" Neil Draper said. "Practically." "Practically," Vivian said. "The sale gets unwound. Title reverts to Mrs. Tanner. You get your $410,000 back, plus whatever closing costs and fees you've laid out from the sellers who misrepresented clear title." "From Gary," Neil said, looking straight at him now, "and from her." He nodded at Denise. "That's not fair," Denise said finally, voice thin. "We didn't know about any old deed. Nobody told us." "You signed a sworn statement," Beaumont said, not looking at her, "certifying you had authority to convey this property and that title was free of undisclosed encumbrances. Whether you knew or not isn't really the question a court's going to ask." "You're our lawyer," Gary said. "Fix this." "I represented the transaction," Beaumont said. "I didn't warrant the underlying chain of title past what you handed me. That was your representation, Gary, not mine." Ruth sat very still through all of it, hands folded on the table the way she'd sat in front of Judge Ellery 2 days before. She hadn't planned to speak, but Neil Draper turned to her now, something almost pleading in his face. "Mrs. Tanner," he said, "I want you to know we didn't know any of this. We thought we were buying from a family handling things fair and square." "I believe you," Ruth said. "You've done nothing wrong here, Mr. Draper. Neither has your wife. Then what happens to us?" "You get your money back," Vivian said. "Every dollar, plus your costs, out of what's recoverable from the sellers. Mrs. Tanner's not looking to keep a nickel of what wasn't rightfully paid to her in the first place." "That's decent of you," Carol Draper said, quiet, looking at Ruth like she hadn't expected that from anybody left in this room. "My husband built that farm with his own hands," Ruth said. "I never once thought decency was optional, even when other people forgot it." Gary's pen had rolled off the legal pad and onto the floor. He didn't pick it up. "Mama," he said, "you're going to bankrupt us. You understand that. Between the buyer coming after us and the bank wanting its money back, we're finished. Both of us." "You bankrupted yourselves the day you sold a house that wasn't fully yours," Ruth said. "I didn't do that to you, Gary. You did that walking into a hospital room and signing papers over a woman who couldn't say no." "We thought," Denise started. "You thought I wouldn't wake up sharp enough to notice," Ruth said. "That's what you thought. Don't dress it up different now that there's people in the room." Beaumont closed his briefcase slowly, the brass latches clicking one after the other. "I'd recommend a recess," he said. "Let the title company finalize figures. Let counsel," he glanced at Gary, "separate counsel, work out repayment terms before anybody says anything else they can't take back." "Fine by me," Vivian said. "Mrs. Tanner's not in a hurry. She's got a farm to get back to." Neil Draper stood, reached a hand across the table toward Ruth. She took it. "For what it's worth," he said, "I hope you get every bit of that place back the way it should have stayed." "I intend to," Ruth said. The Drapers left first, Carol's hand resting light on her husband's back, going out the door. Beaumont followed, already dialing someone on his cell phone before he'd cleared the parking lot. Denise sat a moment longer, staring at the certified copy of the deed still lying in the middle of the table, like she was hoping it might rearrange itself into something less final. 86,000, she said. "Low. That's what we thought we were splitting. Not this. Not 410,000 we've got to find a way to pay back." "You split what wasn't yours," Ruth said. "Doesn't matter what number you had in your head when you did it." Gary stood, gathered his blank legal pad, didn't look at anybody. "This isn't over," he said, at the door. "You'll hear from our lawyer." "I imagine I will," Ruth said. The door swung shut behind him. Earl let out a low whistle from his seat at the far end of the table. $410,000, he said. Didn't figure that number would say itself out loud in a title office on a Friday morning. "Wasn't the only number," Vivian said, gathering her own folder. "Silver dollars still haven't come up yet. Nobody in that room but us knows about those." Ruth looked at the deed lying on the table. Walter's signature, faded but legible, dated a year she barely remembered now, except that it had been a good one. A wet spring, corn shoulder high by the 4th of July. "Let's keep it that way a while longer," she said. "Some things don't need saying to everybody at once." The farmhouse smelled like dust and dish soap when Ruth finally climbed those porch steps again, this time with the key in her own coat pocket, not tucked behind a flower bin. Earl walked the porch boards first, testing each one with his boot before he'd let her past him. "Contractor already come and gone," he said. "Grading crew never got past the gate. Buyer's attorney called it off himself, first thing Monday morning." "Good," Ruth said. "Walter built that barn. Wasn't anybody's to grade but mine." Vivian met them at the bottom step, folder tucked under one arm, phone already buzzing in her coat pocket. "County recorder finalized the reversion this morning," she said. "Deeds back in your name. Clean. No liens, no life estate language needed anymore, since you own it outright again." "Just like that," Earl said. "Just like that," Vivian said. "Took 40 years and one loose floorboard, but yes, just like that." Ruth stood on the porch a long moment, looking at the door Walter had hung himself the spring after they married, hinges a little crooked even now. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying back in that hospital bed, quiet, where nobody could see it and call it weakness. "Let's go in," she said instead. "Pantry first." Inside, the flour bin sat where she'd left it, board still pried up beside it, empty now, except for a little dust and a rectangle of pale wood where the tin had sat for who knew how many years. Gonna need a new one of these, Earl said, nudging the empty space with his boot. Already got one in mind, Ruth said. Walter's old tobacco tin. Cleaned it out this morning before we left the house in town. For what? For whatever comes next that I don't want anybody finding before I'm ready, Ruth said. Man taught me that much, even from the grave. Vivian's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, frowned, then held it up. First State Bank, she said. Loan office. Not your box this time. Gary's. She answered, listened, said little beyond a few short mm-hms, then hung up. They're calling his note, she said. The $40,000 he and Denise put toward that cabin, it ran through a home equity line against his own house. Banks demanding full repayment now that the sale funds it was tied to have been clawed back. How much? Ruth asked. $31,000 of it was already owed before any of this, Vivian said. Now they want the whole line current inside 90 days, or they start foreclosure proceedings on his own place in town. Earl let out a low breath. Man sold his mother's farm to dig himself out of a hole, he said, and it just got twice as deep. Not my doing, Ruth said. His. Ruth found out the rest of it 3 days later, standing in the checkout line at the Briar Hollow IGA of all places, listening to Loretta Combs and another woman she barely recognized talking 2 aisles over like nobody could hear them. Denise Tanner Cole's cabin deal fell clean through, Loretta was saying. Her husband had the listing lined up and everything. 5% commission on that lake place, gone. Sellers backed out soon as they heard the down payment money wasn't clean. Lord, the other woman said, what's that do to a marriage? Don't know, Loretta said, but I heard shouting clear from the driveway last night. Ruth paid for her coffee and her flour, said nothing, and let herself out into the parking lot where Earl was waiting with the truck running. Everybody in this town's already heard, she said, climbing in. Small town, Earl said. News like that don't need a newspaper. It found her again a week later, this time straight from the source. Denise showed up at the farmhouse unannounced. No phone call first, driving a car that still had a dealer's paper tag taped in the back window. Ruth was on the porch shelling late beans into a bowl when the car pulled up the gravel drive. Denise got out slow, like she wasn't sure of her welcome, which she wasn't. Mama, she said. Denise, can I sit? Ruth gestured at the other rocker without looking up from her beans. Denise sat, hands twisting in her lap the way they had back in the title office. Cabin deal's dead, she said. Roger's furious. Says I should have asked more questions before I signed anything, like it was only me that signed. You did sign, Ruth said, right next to your brother. I know it. Denise's voice cracked at the edges. I keep thinking about that hospital room, how easy it was. Gary had the papers already printed. Said the bank wouldn't even blink twice. Said you'd thank us for handling it once you saw how run down that place had gotten without Daddy there to keep it up. Farm wasn't run down, Ruth said. It was resting, same as me. Denise looked out over the yard, past the barn, toward the tree line where Walter used to cut firewood every October without fail. I keep asking myself why I didn't come see the pantry, she said. I helped Daddy can tomatoes in there every August for 20 years. I knew that floorboard creaked. I just never once thought to lift it. Nobody looks under things they think they already own, Ruth said. That's how your father built that hiding spot to work in the first place. Denise wiped her face with the back of one hand, fast, like she was embarrassed to be caught at it. I'm not asking you for money, she said. I know there isn't any owed to me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Out loud, not through a lawyer. Ruth set the bowl of beans down on the porch rail. I hear you, she said. That's not the same as forgiving you, Denise. Not yet. Maybe not for a good while. I understand that. You come out here again, Ruth said, and you help me get this porch swept off before winter. We'll see where we stand come spring. That's the only kind of sorry I know how to trust, the kind that shows back up. Denise nodded, throat working like she was holding something down. I can do that, she said. I'll come Saturday. Bring gloves, Ruth said. Barn needs the loft cleared before first frost, and I'm 78, not stupid enough to climb up there alone. Something almost like a laugh caught in Denise's chest, thin and surprised at itself. She left without asking about Gary, without asking about the silver dollars nobody outside Earl and Vivian even knew existed yet, without asking for anything at all. Ruth watched the car pull back down the drive, dust rising behind it same as always, then picked her bowl back up and went on shelling beans like the whole conversation had been no more than weather passing through. Earl came around from the barn a few minutes later, hat pushed back, sweat at his collar even in the cooler air. That Denise's car? It was. She apologize? She did. You forgive her? Ruth looked out at the dust still settling over the gravel, at the barn Walter built the summer they married, at the porch rail worn smooth under 40-some years of her own hands. Not yet, she said. But she's coming back Saturday to clear the hayloft. We'll see what that's worth. Earl nodded like that answer satisfied him plenty and went back toward the barn without another word, boots crunching soft against the gravel, the sound of it carrying clean across the whole quiet yard. Gary didn't wait for Saturday. He came Thursday, no warning, truck kicking gravel dust all the way up the drive. Ruth was on the porch again, snapping beans, when he climbed out. "Bank's foreclosing," he said, before he even reached the steps. 30 days. "You understand what that means?" "Means you'll lose the house in town," Ruth said, "same as I understood it last week. You could stop this." Gary's voice cracked around the edges. Vivian could slow the filing. "Give me time to refinance somewhere else." "Vivian doesn't work for you," Ruth said. "She works for me. I'm your son. You were my son the day you signed papers over a woman who couldn't say no," Ruth said. "That's the day that matters to me now." Gary stood there a long moment, jaw working, hands opening and closing at his sides like he wanted to grab hold of something that wasn't there anymore. "Denise gets a second chance," he said. "I heard she's coming out here Saturday. Clearing your hayloft like some kind of hired hand." Denise asked, Ruth said. I told you the truth, that the farm was falling down, that you'd thank us." "You told yourself that," Ruth said, "so you wouldn't have to feel what you were doing while you did it." He looked past her, at the porch, the door, the window into the kitchen where the light was on despite it still being afternoon, like he was looking for something to argue with that wasn't his mother's face. "I'll lose everything," he said, quieter now. "You already did," Ruth said. "You just didn't notice till the bank called." He got back in the truck without another word, didn't slam the door. Just pulled it shut, soft, like a man too tired to make noise about it anymore, and drove off down Sugar Camp Lane with the dust rising thin behind him. Earl came around the side of the house once the truck was well gone. "Heard some of that," he said. "Wasn't hiding it," Ruth said. "He gonna lose the house? Bank seems to think so." Ruth went back to her beans. 30 days, he said. Earl leaned on the porch post. "Quiet a minute. Walter used to say a debt always finds its way home. Don't matter how far a man runs from it." "Walter said a lot of things," Ruth said. "Turns out he was right about most of them." Saturday came up clear and cool, first real hint of fall in the air, the kind of morning Walter used to call good drying weather. Denise's car came up the drive at 8 sharp, dealer tag still taped crooked in the back window. She had gloves this time, work boots too, borrowed or bought, Ruth didn't ask which. "Loft's this way," Ruth said, leading her toward the barn. "Watch that third rung. Been loose since before your father died." They worked most of the morning without much talk, hauling down old feed sacks gone stiff with age, a broken hay hook, a nest of barn swallows long since empty. Denise's hands blistered inside the gloves by 10 o'clock. She didn't complain. "Roger left," she said, out of nowhere, halfway through stacking bales. Ruth stopped, looked at her. "Not because of the cabin," Denise said. "Well, partly because of the cabin. Mostly because he said he married somebody who'd have told him the truth about a down payment, not somebody who'd have hidden it." "That's a hard thing to hear," Ruth said. "It's a fair thing to hear," Denise said. "I keep learning that lately. Fair and easy aren't the same word." Ruth handed her a rag for her hands. "No," she said. "They never have been." They finished the loft by noon. Denise stood in the doorway looking back at it, swept clean, sunlight coming through the high window onto floor she hadn't seen bare like that since she was a girl. "Daddy used to let me sleep up here in summer," she said. "Told Mama it built character. It built something," Ruth said. "Not sure character's the whole word for it." Denise almost smiled. "Almost. Same time next Saturday?" she asked. "Fence line needs mending after that," Ruth said. "Bring your own gloves this time. Mine don't stretch to fit 2 people's hands." "I'll bring 2 pair," Denise said, "in case you change your mind about who's doing the work." "Don't push your luck," Ruth said, but there wasn't much heat behind it. Vivian showed up that afternoon with a folder thinner than the ones before it, just a few pages, and a look on her face like she'd been carrying good news since breakfast and waiting on the right moment to set it down. Bank finalized the numbers, she said, spreading the pages on the porch table. Draper refunds processed. Full 410, plus closing costs, cleared through escrow this morning. And Gary, Ruth said. Notes in his name alone, Vivian said. Denise's name never made it onto that home equity line. Whatever comes of the foreclosure, it's his to carry. Good, Ruth said. Then, after a moment, not good the way winning's good. Good the way owing what you owe is good. Vivian nodded, tapped the last page. Silver dollars are appraised, she said. 40 coins, all pre-1965. Coin dealer in Springfield put the number at 152,000, give or take, depending on the day silver trades. Earl let out a low whistle from the porch step. Man hid himself a small fortune under a flour bin, he said, never once told his own wife. He told me, Ruth said, just not in words I understood at the time. She looked out over the yard, the barn loft swept clean now, the hens scratching near the coop like they'd never stopped, like 6 years and a stroke and a stolen farm hadn't happened at all in their small, feathered world. What do you aim to do with it? Earl asked. That's near $600,000 sitting between the land and the coins, once it's all said and settled. Ruth was quiet a moment, turning that number over the way she'd turn over a good stone found in a plowed field, weighing it without needing to say much about the weight. Walter always said a farm this size could feed more than just us if somebody bothered to plan it right, she said. I've got widows all over this county living on canned beans and government checks, same as I'd have been if he hadn't hid that tin. You thinking a business? Vivian asked. I'm thinking a co-op, Ruth said. Canning, preserving, selling what we put up at the farmer's market in town. Women my age got skills nobody's paying them a dime for. I've got a barn standing empty and a kitchen big enough for 6 people elbow to elbow. Earl grinned, slow, like the idea was settling into him easy as an old boot. Walter's kitchen, he said. Has a ring to it. Walter's co-op, Ruth said. Kitchen makes it sound like I'm cooking supper for company. This is women earning their own money, same as he'd have wanted for me if he'd lived long enough to say so outright instead of hiding it in a bank box. Vivian gathered her folder, stood to leave, then paused at the porch steps. For what it's worth, she said, I've done a lot of closings in this county. Most people who come into money like this spend the first year deciding what to buy. You're the first one I've seen decide what to build. I already bought everything I wanted 40 years ago, Ruth said. Man, house, land, a life. Just took some folks a stroke and a bad summer to try and take it back from me. Vivian's car pulled off down the drive, same dust rising, same as always, and Ruth sat a while longer on the porch with Earl, the beans long since shelled, the sun dropping low enough to gild the barn roof gold at the edges. Walter's tin's still sitting on my kitchen counter, she said, empty since I moved everything to the bank. Gonna put it back under the floorboard? No, Ruth said. Gonna hang it by the pantry door, nail and all. So anybody who walks through that kitchen from here on has to look at it before they get to the flour. Why's that matter? Because nobody in this family ever thinks to look twice at what's right in front of them, Ruth said. Maybe if it's hanging at eye level, next time somebody won't need 40 years and a stroke to notice what's worth protecting. The tin went up on a nail by the pantry door that same evening. Earl held it steady. Ruth drove the nail home herself. 3 strikes with Walter's old hammer, the one with tape still wound around the handle where he'd cracked it years back. Level enough? She asked. Earl squinted at it. Level enough for what it's for. Word got around fast after that, same as everything did in Briar Hollow. Ruth didn't spread it herself. She didn't have to. By the second week of October, 3 women had already knocked on her door asking about the co-op before she'd so much as painted a sign. Opal Dieter came first, 71 years old, widowed 4 winters back, still living on her husband's railroad pension and whatever she could put up in ball jars each fall. Heard you're starting something, Opal said, standing on the porch with a basket of green tomatoes balanced on one hip. Thinking on it, Ruth said. Think faster, Opal said. I've got 200 pounds of tomatoes and a pension check that don't stretch past the 15th. Ruth laughed, first real laugh Earl had heard out of her in a long while. Come on in the kitchen, she said. Let's see what we're working with. They worked with more than Ruth expected. Vivian helped her set the co-op up proper, A small farm business filed with the county, $12 for the paperwork, nothing fancy. You'll want it separate from your own name, Vivian said, spreading forms on the kitchen table. Anything happens to you, this keeps running without a lawyer picking it apart. Smart, Ruth said. Walter would have liked that. Man never trusted anything that only lived in one person's head. Earl took charge of the barn loft they'd cleared with Denise, framing out shelving along one wall, buying lumber on credit at the hardware store in town. $61 for 2x4s and brackets. Ruth paid him back out of the first jar money before he even asked. Don't need paying, Earl said. Don't care, Ruth said. Man works, man gets paid. That's not charity, that's just decent. By the first Saturday of November, 5 women stood shoulder to shoulder in Ruth's kitchen and the barn loft above it, canning tomatoes, apple butter, pickled beans, whatever the last of the garden gave up before frost took the rest. They carried it all to the farmer's market on the square in cardboard boxes, folding table borrowed from the church, hand-lettered sign taped to the front. Walter's Co-op, home canned, Briar Hollow Widows. First Saturday brought in $212. Ruth split it 5 ways after covering the cost of jars and lids, $40 a case wholesale from the feed store. Opal cried a little, quiet, counting her share twice like she didn't trust the number to hold still. $40-some, Opal said. For jars I'd have given away for nothing. Not anymore you won't, Ruth said. Man never thinks twice about paying a plumber. No reason a woman's canning ought to be worth less than a wrench. Gary came around one more time before the bank finished with him. Ruth was at the market table when his truck pulled up along the curb, hazard lights blinking, like he couldn't be bothered to park it proper anymore. House sold, he said, standing at the edge of her table like a stranger deciding whether to buy something. Private sale. Beat the foreclosure by 10 days. Good, Ruth said, wrapping a jar of apple butter in newspaper for a customer. That's smarter than waiting on the bank to do it for you. I'm renting now, he said. 2-bedroom, over on Locust. I know the building, Ruth said. Roof needs work. He stood there a moment longer, hands in his pockets, watching Opal make change for a customer at the far end of the table. Co-op's doing good, he said. Heard about it around town. It is, Ruth said. You never asked me to help with it. Ruth looked up at him, jar still in her hands. You never asked to help either, she said. That's usually how asking works, Gary. Starts from the one who wants in. He didn't answer that, just nodded, slow, and got back in his truck and drove off toward Locust Street where the roof needed work and the rent was due on the first same as anybody else's. Ruth watched him go, then went back to wrapping jars, steady, like the whole exchange had cost her no more than the newspaper she was using. That bother you? Earl asked, coming up beside her with an empty crate. Some, Ruth said. Not as much as it would have a year ago. Why's that? Because a year ago I still thought I owed him an answer, Ruth said. Now I know I don't owe him anything but the truth, and I already gave him that. Denise showed up at the market too, most Saturdays now. Not selling, just helping haul crates and make change when the line got long. She still hadn't asked about the money, hadn't asked about the coins, the deed, any of it. Ruth noticed that same as she noticed everything. Filed it away without remark. Fence line's holding, Denise said, wiping her hands on her apron during a lull. Checked it again Tuesday. Good, Ruth said. Winter'll test it soon enough. Mama, Denise hesitated. You ever gonna tell me what all was really in that bank box? Earl won't say. Vivian won't say. Someday, Ruth said. Not today. Fair enough, Denise said, and went back to stacking crates. No push behind it, no whine, just acceptance. Same as Ruth had asked of her weeks back on the porch. By the time the market closed for the season, the co-op had cleared better than $1,100 total, split 5 ways. More coming each week as word spread past Briar Hollow into the next 2 counties over. Ruth kept the ledger herself, in a spiral notebook she bought for $1.10 at the drugstore. Every dollar written down plain, nothing hidden, nothing buried under any floorboard. Funny thing, she said to Earl one evening, closing the notebook on the porch, man spent his whole life hiding money so nobody'd ever find it. I'm spending mine making sure everybody sees every dime. Different kind of insurance, Earl said. Same idea though, Ruth said. Just aimed the other direction. The frost came hard the second week of November, the kind that killed tomato vines overnight and put an end to picking anything else out of the garden till spring. Ruth walked the co-op ledger over one more time at the kitchen table, then closed the notebook and looked up at Earl. "Denise still coming Saturdays?" she asked. "Everyone," Earl said. "Hasn't missed since the loft." "Then it's time," Ruth said. She found Denise in the barn that Saturday, forking old straw into a wheelbarrow, breath showing white in the cold. Ruth stood in the doorway a moment before she spoke. "Leave that," Ruth said. "Come sit with me." Denise set the fork down, wiped her hands on her jeans. Something in Ruth's voice made her look twice. They sat on two overturned buckets, the barn quiet around them, Ruth's old mare shifting in her stall. "You asked me once what was in that bank box," Ruth said. "You said someday," Denise said. "Didn't push." "That's why I'm telling you now," Ruth said. "You stopped asking. That's the only reason you get to know." Denise went still. "Deed," Ruth said. "Your daddy filed one back in '68, gave me the land outright my whole life, no matter whose name went on any later paper, 40 silver dollars on top of it, hid in the same box." "That's what stopped the sale," Denise said, quiet. "That's what stopped the sale," Ruth said. Denise looked down at her hands, gloves stiff with dried mud. "Coins worth much?" "152,000, Ruth said, "give or take." Denise didn't say anything for a long moment. When she did, her voice had gone thin. "Roger would have married me a lot longer for that number." "Roger left for a lot of reasons," Ruth said. "Money wasn't the one that mattered." "No," Denise said. "Guess it wasn't." She picked the fork back up, turned it over in her hands, not working, just holding it. "I'm not asking for any of it," she said. "The money. I want that said plain so you don't wonder." "I wasn't wondering," Ruth said. "You've been out here every Saturday since September hauling straw for nothing but blistered hands. Man doesn't need to ask what a woman like that wants. It's plain enough already." Denise almost smiled at that, same thin, almost smile she'd worn back in the loft. "Fence line's got a soft spot past the east gate," she said. "Noticed it yesterday." "Then we'll fix it Tuesday," Ruth said. "Don't wait on Saturday for everything, Denise. Farm doesn't run on a schedule that convenient." "No," Denise said. "Guess it doesn't." They went back to the straw together, the wheelbarrow filling slow, breath clouding in the cold barn air, and neither one said much else that morning. Some things didn't need more words laid on top of them. Gary's bill came due the first week of December. Ruth heard about it from Vivian, who'd heard it from the clerk at the courthouse, who'd heard it from somebody at the bank, the way news traveled in Briar Hollow whether anybody wanted it to or not. "Insurance company let him go," Vivian said, standing on Ruth's porch with her coat collar up against the wind. "Foreclosure showed up on a background check. License review, they called it. Man sells trust for a living. Hard to sell it once the whole town's read the filing." "He's still working?" Ruth asked. "Independent now," Vivian said. "Out of that apartment on Locust. Doing policies on commission out of his truck, from what I hear." Ruth took that in slow, the way she took in most hard news anymore, without much change in her face. "That how a debt finds its way home," she said. "Earl was right about that." "You feel bad for him?" Vivian asked. "I feel what I feel," Ruth said. "Don't mean I owe him different than what he's getting." The first real snow came 3 days before Christmas, soft and steady, the kind that stuck to the barn roof and softened the fence line into one long white ribbon out past the east gate. Ruth stood at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching it come down, Walter's tin catching the gray morning light where it hung by the pantry door. Earl came stamping snow off his boots at the back porch, letting himself in the way he'd taken to doing most mornings now. The door never locked against him. "Hens all right?" Ruth asked. Same question she'd asked in that hospital bed 6 weeks back. Same question that still came first, before coffee, before anything else. "Hens are fine," Earl said. "Coop's holding the cold better than I figured. You did good work on it." "Walter did the work," Ruth said. "I just kept fixing what he left." Earl poured himself coffee without asking, settled into the chair across from her, same chair he'd taken to claiming as his own since September. "Co-op's got 6 women signed on now," he said. "Bettina Fry asked about joining just yesterday, down at the feed store. Bettina makes a fine apple butter," Ruth said. "Tell her Tuesdays, same as the rest." "Already did," Earl said. Ruth looked out at the snow a while longer, quiet, coffee cooling in her hands. Walter used to say snow was the land resting, she said. Told me once a field that never rests goes thin. Stops giving back what you put into it. He say that about people too? Earl asked. Didn't have to, Ruth said. I watched him rest exactly never, 40 years running, right up till his heart gave out in that hayfield. Man never took his own advice a day in his life. You taking it? Earl asked. Ruth considered that, turning her cup slow on the table. Trying to, she said. Some mornings better than others. Denise's car came up the drive around noon, later than her usual Saturday hour, snow packed thick on the tires. She came in through the kitchen door without knocking anymore. Same as Earl, stamping her boots on the mat Ruth kept just inside for that purpose now. Roads are bad, she said. Almost didn't make it up County Road 9. Didn't expect you in this, Ruth said. Storm like this, most folks stay home. Wanted to bring you something, Denise said, and set an envelope on the kitchen table. Plain white, no bank markings on it. Ruth looked at it, then at her daughter. What's this? Sold my share of furniture out of the Locust Street apartment, Denise said. Rogers, mostly. Didn't want it following me anywhere new. Got $210 for the lot. And you're bringing it here, why? Ruth said. Co-op needs a new canning kettle, Denise said. Opal mentioned it last Tuesday. Said the big one's got a crack starting along the bottom seam. Ruth sat with that a moment, the envelope between them on the table, snow ticking soft against the window glass. You don't have to buy your way into this family, Denise, she said. Showing up's already done that. I know, Denise said. This isn't about buying in. It's about a kettle that's cracking and me having $210 sitting in an envelope doing nothing. Ruth almost laughed at that, the plain sense of it, so much like something Walter would have said. All right, she said. Kettle it is. Denise sat down across from her. Same chair Earl favored, coat still damp with melting snow. Mama, she said, I'm not asking for the money. I want to keep saying that till you believe it clean through. I believe it, Ruth said. Believed it a while now. Then why do you look at me sometimes like you're still waiting on the other shoe? Ruth considered the question honestly, the way she tried to consider most things now without rushing past the hard parts. Because your brother looked me in the eye plenty of times too, she said. Told me things that turned out only half true, or not true at all. Takes longer than one winter to trust a person's face again after that. Fair, Denise said. I told you fair and easy aren't the same word. Guess I'm learning that from both sides of it now. Ruth reached across the table, laid her hand over her daughter's, rough palm over rough palm. Both of them worked raw some from barn chores and canning jars, and a season neither one had expected to be living through this way. You're doing right by this family, Ruth said. Took you longer than I'd have liked, but you're doing it now, and that's the part that counts going forward. Denise's eyes went bright, but she didn't let it spill over, just nodded once and squeezed her mother's hand back. Outside, the snow kept coming steady over Sugar Camp Lane, settling white, and even across the barn roof, the fence line, the coop where the hens stayed warm and fed and let out every morning same as they'd been the whole long year through. Walter's tin caught what light came through the kitchen window, hanging quiet by the pantry door, waiting the way it had always waited for somebody willing to look at it twice. Christmas came 4 days later, quiet and white over Sugar Camp Lane. Ruth strung no lights on the porch. Walter never liked them, said they drew moths in summer and did nothing in winter but waste power. She hung a wreath instead, plain cedar, cut from the fence row. Earl showed up Christmas morning with a paper sack of oranges and a jar of his sister's molasses. Didn't want you sitting here alone, he said, stamping snow off his boots. Wasn't going to be alone, Ruth said. Denise is coming by noon. Figured she might. You figured right about a lot of things this year, Earl. Man pays attention 40 years, he learns a few things. He set the oranges on the counter. Ruth put coffee on. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke, same as it had every Christmas Walter was alive, though she'd never told anyone that on purpose. Denise arrived just past noon, snow still falling soft outside the window. She carried a casserole dish wrapped in a dish towel and a small box tied with string. Ham and beans, she said, Roger's mother's recipe. Only good thing that came out of that marriage. Set it on the stove, Ruth said. Smells fine already. They ate at the kitchen table, 3 plates instead of 5. the empty chairs no longer aching the way they had in October. Denise handed Ruth the small box after the plates were cleared. Ruth untied the strings slow, careful, the way she did most things now. Inside sat a photograph, framed plain, black and white. Walter standing in the hayfield, younger than Ruth remembered him looking. Hat pushed back, grinning at whoever held the camera. "Found it in a box at the old house," Denise said. "Before the sale went through the first time. Almost didn't grab it. Glad I did." Ruth looked at it a long moment. "Forgot I still had this taken," she said. "Forgot a lot of things got forgotten these last months." "Not everything," Denise said. "Tin's still hanging by the pantry." "That it is," Ruth said, and set the photograph on the shelf beside the window, where the morning light would find it every day going forward. The co-op's new kettle came in the first week of January, paid for out of Denise's $210 plus 11 more, Ruth added from the ledger. Opal unpacked it in the barn loft, like it was a wedding gift, running her hand along the copper bottom. $84, Opal said, reading the receipt taped inside the box. "Never held anything that cost that much in my whole life that wasn't a car or a casket." "Hold on to it a while then," Ruth said. "Ought to last past both." Bettina Fry joined the co-op that Saturday, same as Earl had promised the feed store she would. She brought 6 quarts of pear preserves and a nervous kind of quiet Ruth recognized from her own first weeks at the market table. "Never sold anything before," Bettina admitted, setting her jars in a careful row. "Husband handled all that. Now he's gone and I don't know what a jar's worth." $4 a quart, Ruth said. "Maybe $4.50 if the label's neat. You'll learn the rest same as the rest of us did." "That easy?" "Wasn't easy for any of us," Ruth said. "Just simple. Different thing." By the second Saturday of January, the co-op cleared $340, 7 ways now instead of 5, Bettina's hands shaking a little when she counted her share for the first time. $60, Bettina said. "For jars I'd have let spoil in the cellar." "Spoiled jars don't feed anybody," Ruth said. "These will." Vivian stopped by the farmhouse on a gray afternoon in late January, boots crunching through old snow gone hard and gray at the edges. She carried a folder, thin, nothing like the stack she'd hauled to the bank back in October. "Courthouse sent the last of it," Vivian said, setting the folder on the kitchen table. "Deeds recorded clean in your name, no liens, no clouds on the title. Land's yours plain and simple, same as Walter meant it to be." Ruth opened the folder, looked at the single page inside, her name typed clear at the top. "Feels different seeing it typed out," she said. "Different than just knowing it." "Ought to feel different," Vivian said. "Knowing and having it in writing aren't the same kind of safe." "Heard anything more on Gary?" Ruth asked, closing the folder. Vivian hesitated a moment, the way she did when the news wasn't good, and she wasn't sure how much Ruth wanted carried in the door. "Truck got repossessed last week," she said. "The Ford. He's walking to his own appointments now or borrowing his landlord's car." "That true?" "Heard it from the bank clerk," Vivian said. "Same one heard about the foreclosure. Small town, Ruth. Things get around." Ruth sat with that a moment, no triumph in her face, no particular sorrow either. He dig himself further under, or is he climbing out some? "Hard to say," Vivian said. "Independent insurance is a hard row when nobody trusts you with their policy anymore." "He earned that mistrust himself," Ruth said. "Nobody handed it to him." "No," Vivian said. "He surely didn't get handed that." Earl came in through the back door partway through, stomping snow, catching the tail end of it. "Talking about Gary?" he asked. "Some," Ruth said. "Man's walking to work now. Truck's gone." Earl set his hat on the peg by the door. Quiet a moment. "Karma's got a slow clock," he said. "But it keeps good time." "That it does," Ruth said. February brought a thaw early, then a hard freeze back on its heels, the kind of weather that cracked pipes and split fence posts if a body wasn't careful watching for it. Ruth walked the fence line with Denise on a Tuesday, breath clouding, boots crunching frozen mud. "East gate's soft again," Denise said, kneeling to check a post. "Same spot as before." "Ground never really heals right where water pools," Ruth said. "We'll set a new post come spring. Can't dig this frozen." "I could come Wednesdays too," Denise said. "Not just Saturdays. Rogers finally signed the last of the papers. I've got my evenings back." Ruth looked at her daughter a long moment, snow starting to fall thin and light around them. "Divorce is final then." Final as of Monday, Denise said. Didn't want much from him. Didn't need much either, not after that kettle. Man never once asked what a hard day cost me. Guess I stopped waiting on him to ask. You did right walking away clean, Ruth said. Man who never asks what a day cost you isn't paying attention to anything worth keeping. Learned that from watching you, Denise said. Watching you not need Gary's forgiveness, or his apology, or anything else from him. Just watching you keep standing up every morning regardless. Ruth reached out, brushed snow off her daughter's shoulder, the gesture plain, unhurried. Wednesdays then, she said. Fence'll be glad of the extra hands. They walked back toward the house together, the barn loft light glowing faint through the falling snow, the co-op ledger waiting on the kitchen table where Ruth had left it that morning, every dollar written down plain, nothing hidden, nothing buried. Behind them, past the kitchen window, Walter's tin caught the last gray light of the afternoon, hanging steady by the pantry door, waiting on the season still to come. March came in wet, then hard, the way it always did on Sugar Camp Lane, frost heaving the fence posts before the ground gave up and turned soft for good. Ruth stood at the east gate with Earl, watching him tamp dirt around the new post they'd set that morning. Holds better than the old one, Earl said. Deeper this time, 2 foot down instead of 1. Walter never dug deep enough on that corner, Ruth said. Told him so twice. Man never listened to me about fence posts. Listened plenty about other things. Some things, Ruth said. Not fence posts. Vivian's car came up the drive around noon, tires throwing mud where the thaw had softened the lane. She carried a folder again, thinner than the last one, and a small cloth pouch that clinked when she set it on the porch rail. Bank finished the box inventory, Vivian said. Everything's yours clean. Deed, the silver, all of it logged and released. How much of the silver's left? Ruth asked. Sold 6 coins to a dealer in Springfield last month, like you asked, Vivian said. Got 1,100 each. 6,600 total, sitting in your account now. And the rest? 34 coins still in the box, Vivian said. Worth close to 4,000 apiece at today's price, if you ever want more of them sold. Ruth picked up the pouch, felt the weight of it. 6 coins Vivian had brought back for her to hold before the rest went to auction. Walter never told me what these were, she said. Just said keep the tin safe. Never said safe from what? Safe from a day like the one you had, Earl said. Man had a plan, Ruth. Just never got around to saying it plain. No, Ruth said. He didn't. She sat with the pouch a long moment, coins cool and heavy in her palm, porch boards creaking under Earl's boots as he shifted his weight. I've been thinking on what to do with the money, she said. The whole of it. Not just spend it and forget where it came from. What are you thinking? Vivian asked. Co-op needs a truck, Ruth said. One that runs. And there's women in this county besides us, widows same as me, sitting on land they don't know how to work alone. I want a fund. Something with Walter's name on it, so it doesn't just sit in a bank account doing nothing. Vivian nodded slow, writing something in her folder. How much are you thinking to start it? 10,000, Ruth said. Out of the silver money. Rest stays put in case I need it later. But 10,000 starts something worth starting. That's real money, Ruth, Vivian said. It's Walter's money, Ruth said. Man hid it under a flower bin for 6 years waiting on somebody to need it bad enough to look. Time it did some good instead of just sitting in a box. Earl looked at her a moment, something in his face gone soft around the eyes. He'd have liked that, he said. Better than liked it. Don't know that for certain, Ruth said, but I like to think it. Denise came by that Wednesday, coat still smelling of barn straw from the morning chores, boots caked with the last of the mud season. She found Ruth and Earl in the loft, sorting through jars for the spring inventory, the new copper kettle sitting bright and dented free on its shelf. Vivian called me, Denise said. Told me about the fund. She talked too much, Ruth said, not unkindly. She talks exactly enough, Denise said. I think it's a good thing, Mama, a real good thing. You've got no stake in it, Ruth said, just so you know that plain. I know it, Denise said. Didn't come here for a stake. Came here because Opal said you needed another set of hands sorting jars before Saturday. Opal's right about that, Ruth said, and handed her daughter a crate. They worked a while in the quiet way the loft had settled into over the winter, jars clinking soft against straw, dust turning slow in the bars of light through the loft window. Earl broke the quiet first. "You settle on a name yet?" he asked. "For the fund." Ruth set down the jar in her hands. "Been rolling a few around," she said. "Nothing stuck clean." "What about just his name?" Denise said. "Plain as that. The Walter Tanner Fund. Man doesn't need dressing up to be remembered, right?" Ruth considered it, turning the words over the way she turned most things over now, slow and careful before she let them settle. "Walter never wanted his name on anything," she said. "Didn't even want it on the mailbox. Said a name on a thing was asking for trouble." "Man's past worrying about trouble now," Earl said. "Let him have the name. He earned it plenty, hiding that tin the way he did." "The Walter Tanner Fund," Ruth said, trying it out loud in the loft air, dust settling slow around the words. "For farm widows of Berry County." "That's a mouthful," Denise said. "Then we'll shorten it on the sign," Ruth said. "Walter's Fund. Simple enough." Opal came up the loft ladder just then, breathing hard from the climb, a paintbrush stuck behind one ear like she'd forgotten it was there. "Bettina wants to know if we're painting that sign today or next Saturday," she said. "She's got the board cut already, down in her truck." "Bring it up," Ruth said. "No sense waiting on a board that's already cut." Bettina hauled the board up herself, pine plank sanded smooth. No fancy trim to it, just clean wood waiting on paint. She set it across 2 hay bales and looked at Ruth. "What's it say?" "Walter's Fund," Ruth said. "Underneath that, put the co-op name too. Sugar Camp Canning Co-op, established this past September." "That's a good name," Bettina said, already dipping the brush. Ruth watched her work, the letters coming up dark and even against the pale wood. W then A then L, slow and careful the way Bettina did most things, now that she'd learned nobody was going to rush her through her own life anymore. "You're steadier with a brush than I figured," Ruth said. "Husband never let me paint anything," Bettina said. "Said I'd mess up the trim. Guess I'm finding out different now. Most things a person's told they can't do turn out to just be things nobody ever let them try," Ruth said. Bettina looked up from the board a moment, brush still. "That true for you too?" "Some of it," Ruth said, "learning the rest of it same as you." By the time the sign dried, the light through the loft window had gone long and gold, the way March afternoons did when the day couldn't decide between winter and spring. Earl carried the board down the ladder careful, both hands, like it was something that mattered more than a piece of pine and some paint. "Where do you want it hung?" he asked. "Barn door," Ruth said. "Where folks see it coming up the drive." He nailed it above the barn door himself, 4 nails, level as he could manage, stepping back to check it twice before he was satisfied. Ruth stood in the yard looking up at it. Walter's Fund in Bettina's careful dark letters, Sugar Camp Canning Co-op underneath, the whole board catching the last of the afternoon sun. "Simple as that," Earl said. "Didn't need to be more than that," Ruth said. They stood together a while, the yard quiet except for hens scratching somewhere behind the coop, the fence line running clean and mended out past the east gate. Ruth thought about the closing table back in January, Gary's face gone pale when Vivian read the clause out loud, Denise's hand going still on the table, thought about the flour bin, the loose board, the tin that had waited 6 years for somebody to need it bad enough to look. None of that showed on her face now, standing in the yard with Earl, just an old woman looking at a sign with her husband's name on it, planted where anybody driving up the lane would see it plain. "Ever hear from Gary?" Earl asked, careful, like he wasn't sure if the question belonged in a moment like this one. "Card at Christmas," Ruth said. "No return address on it, just a card. That bother you?" "Used to," Ruth said. "Some days it still does. But I've got a fund with his father's name on it and a co-op that feeds 7 families now instead of nothing. Man can come around when he's ready, or he can stay gone. Farm doesn't stop running either way." "No," Earl said. "It surely doesn't." Ruth turned from the sign, started back toward the house, boots crunching over ground still hard in patches where the frost hadn't quite let go. "It was never about the money, Earl," she said. "Not the 86,000 they took, not the silver, none of it. Was about somebody walking up these porch steps and opening that pantry door like they had a right to look." "You always had the right," Earl said. "Took me a long while to believe that," Ruth said. "Believe it clean through, same as Denise keeps saying about her own doubts, but I believe it now." She stopped at the porch steps, looked back once at the barn, the sign catching gold light, the fence line running clean past the coop. Somewhere behind the house, a hen called out, sharp and satisfied, the sound carrying thin across the yard in the cooling air. Ruth almost smiled at that, the plainness of it. A hen hollering about nothing in particular on a farm that was hers again, deed and dirt and all, same as Walter had always meant it to stay. April came in soft, the lane drying to hard-packed dirt where the mud had finally let go. Vivian pulled up on a Thursday morning, no folder in her hand this time, just her purse and a cup of gas station coffee. "Not bringing me papers today?" Ruth asked, meeting her at the porch steps. "None today," Vivian said. "Wanted you to hear this from me before it got around wrong. County clerks changed how she records deeds. How's that concern me?" "She's flagging every sale now," Vivian said. "Checking for life estates, old reservations, anything buried in a prior deed before she'll stamp a new one through. Says she never wants another Tanner file crossing her desk." Ruth stood with that a moment, the porch boards cool under her bare feet. "She tell you that? Or you hear it secondhand?" "Told me herself," Vivian said. "Practically apologized for missing yours the first time. Said from here on, nobody signs away land they don't fully own, not on her watch." "Well," Ruth said, "something good came of all that paperwork then." "Something good came of you looking behind a flower bin," Vivian said. "Clerks just catching up." Ruth almost laughed at that, waved Vivian up onto the porch for coffee, and they sat a while on the steps, watching Earl's truck rattle up the drive with a load of chicken wire in the bed. "New coop wire?" Ruth called out. "Fox got through the old fencing Tuesday night," Earl said, climbing down. "Lost 2 hens before I heard the fuss." "Lord," Ruth said, already moving toward the yard. "Which 2? The speckled one and that ornery red who never lays right anyway," Earl said. "Rest are shook up, but fine." Ruth walked past him toward the hen yard without another word, the same quick step she'd had climbing porch steps back in January, checking a house that wasn't supposed to be hers anymore. She found the gap in the fencing herself, low corner where the wire had rusted through, exactly where Earl pointed. "Ought to have caught this sooner," Earl said, coming up behind her. "Can't watch every corner of every fence every day," Ruth said. "Just fix what's broke when you find it broke." They strung the new wire together that afternoon, Ruth holding it taut while Earl stapled it to the posts, the surviving hens clucking and pacing near the coop door, waiting to be let back into a yard that felt safe again. "You know," Earl said, working a staple in, "first thing you asked about coming out of that hospital bed wasn't the farm. Wasn't the money neither." "Asked twice if anybody'd let the hens out," Ruth said. "Nurse thought I was confused." "Wasn't confused," Earl said. "Just had your priorities set plain, even half under. Somebody's got to feed what can't feed itself," Ruth said. "Rest of it can wait its turn." They finished the last stretch of wire as the light went long and orange over the barn roof. Bettina Fry's truck coming up the lane not long after. A girl Ruth didn't know riding in the passenger seat, maybe 25, a baby on her hip when she climbed out. "This is Carol Whitfield," Bettina said. "Husband passed in a logging accident back in the winter. Left her the house and about 4 acres, and no idea what to do with either one." Carol shifted the baby to her other hip, looking uncertain standing there in the yard. "Bettina said you all take in anybody with a garden and some jars. We take in anybody willing to do the work," Ruth said. "Garden and jars come later." "I've got a garden," Carol said. "Tomatoes mostly. Never sold anything in my life. Wasn't anybody here who had 6 months back," Ruth said. "You'll learn the same as the rest of us." Carol looked past Ruth toward the barn, the sign catching the last of the sun, Walter's Fund in Bettina's steady paint, and something in her face eased a little, like she'd found a place that already knew what she was carrying. "That fund?" Carol said. "Bettina told me on the drive over. Said I could ask it for help with the roof if I needed." "You ask Vivian Marsh in town," Ruth said. "She keeps the paperwork on it. But yes, that's exactly what it's there for." "Why would you do that for somebody you never met?" Carol asked. "Because somebody built me a fence out of silver dollars he never told me about," Ruth said. "And I figured the least I owe him is passing it on to the next one who needs it." Carol didn't have an answer for that, just nodded, holding the baby a little closer, and Bettina steered her off toward the porch to see about a Saturday spot at the co-op table. Earl watched them go, then looked at Ruth. "Getting to be a regular operation," he said. "Started as 5 women and a card table. Started as 1 flower bin and a loose board," Ruth said. "Rest just kept happening after. Evening came down slow and gold over Sugar Camp Lane, the kind of April evening that smelled like turned dirt and new grass. The hens settled and quiet behind their mended wire. Ruth walked to the coop door herself, latch cool under her palm, and lifted it. The hens spilled out into the yard first light of the following morning. Same as always, same scramble and cluck and dust scratching that had greeted her every day of her life on this farm. 6 years a widow and 80 years old this coming August. She stood at the coop door in her housecoat, coffee going cold in her hand, watching them scatter toward the fence line Earl had strung true the day before. Through the kitchen window behind her, Walter's tin caught the early sun where it hung by the pantry door, plain and dented, holding nothing now but the memory of what it had carried. Ruth didn't need to open it to know it was empty. She knew exactly what it had given her, and exactly where the rest of it had gone. She let the hens finish their scattering, then turned back toward the house, boots crossing ground that was hers, plain and clear, clean through to the deed.